My name is Owen. About 2 years ago, I was working as an IT specialist for a tech company in Texas when a new employee named Merlin was hired. He had an impressive resume with a degree from a prestigious university, but his physical appearance was an insult to a professional office environment. Merlin always wore clothes that were wrinkled and badly faded, and sometimes they were covered with strange, dark stains. But the worst part was the smell that radiated from him, a pungent, suffocating mix of rubbing alcohol and heavy bleach. Nobody wanted to get close to Merlin. Everyone was polite to his face, but their avoidance was obvious because they always found an excuse to leave the room whenever he showed up. Since I was the person assigned to train new hires, I had to interact with him whether I wanted to or not. After a few days of talking to him, I was actually impressed by how smart he was. Since we had to attend meetings with outside partners, I tried to give him some subtle advice about his choice of clothes. Merlin just laughed it off and said it was his special hobby. One night, the two of us worked overtime until almost 9 p.m. When we finished, Merlin suddenly asked if I wanted to go to his place to see something interesting. For some reason I still don't understand, I agreed to go. Merlin's apartment was in an old complex quite far from the city center. As soon as he opened the door, I immediately regretted coming. The inside looked like a junkyard. Clothes were scattered everywhere, on chairs, across the floor, and piled up in heaps mixed with cardboard boxes and empty bottles. The air was thick with the choking smell of medical alcohol and cleaning chemicals. Merlin opened a cardboard box and pulled out a man's jacket with a massive stain right on the chest. He began to cradle it, stroking the fabric gently. He whispered about how great the jacket was and said the previous owner had a vibrant life before being crushed to death by a semi-truck. I stood there frozen. I was shivering, and I couldn't make sense of what he was saying. He looked at me and happily explained that he bought clothes from dead people on the dark web. I tried to keep my voice steady and asked him why on earth he would do that. Merlin held his head high with a very confident air. He spoke very clearly about how he wanted to help the dead continue their lives by wearing their clothes. Then he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. He told me that lately, buying clothes from the internet wasn't satisfying enough anymore. Merlin said he wanted clothes that still had the fresh scent of a recent death. Merlin started talking about homeless people, saying that if they disappeared, nobody would even notice. I couldn't take another second of it. I stammered an excuse about feeling sick and walked as fast as I could toward the door. Merlin didn't try to stop me. He just stood there, watching me leave with a blank stare that was absolutely terrifying. I left that apartment in a state of total shock. For the next few days, I avoided Merlin at all costs. I only talked to him when it was absolutely necessary for work, kept my distance, and made sure I was never alone with him. A week later, Merlin vanished. At first, everyone thought he was just out sick. Later, HR said they couldn't reach him and terminated his contract. Merlin's desk was cleared out, and his internal accounts were locked. His name slowly faded away from office gossip. I never went to the police because I had no evidence other than the ramblings of an eccentric guy. To this day, I still don't know if Merlin actually carried out the things he hinted at. I don't know if he disappeared because he ran away, moved to a new city, or because he did something truly horrific. Ever since then, whenever I pass a homeless person on the street, I unconsciously stop to look at them a little closer. And every time I smell the scent of bleach, I am instantly taken back to Merlin's horrifying apartment. I still wonder, did he really go through with his twisted plan to become a killer? My name is Beavis. At the time, I lived alone in an old apartment complex on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. The building was pretty run down, with thin walls and creaky hardwood floors. As for the soundproofing, I'm not even sure it existed. Working as a freelance IT guy meant I spent most of my time at home. The apartment directly above me belonged to the Wilsons. I wasn't close with them. I just knew there were three of them: Mr. Robert Wilson, his wife, and their teenage daughter. They weren't like normal neighbors. Every single night, they held prayer sessions that lasted for hours. It wouldn't have mattered if they were just a typical devout family, but I had never heard a religious gathering get that loud before. It always started with rapid, broken chanting, followed by the sound of heavy stomping, jumping, and chaotic movement. In this neighborhood, people usually kept to themselves, so I hesitated to say anything to them. Then, one night, things went too far, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Around midnight, the chanting started again, but this time it was 3 times louder than usual. It sounded like several people talking at once in a state of total frenzy. Heavy footsteps thudded constantly, sometimes running in circles, sometimes stomping in place. I looked at the glass of water on my desk and could actually see the surface vibrating. I tried to endure it, checking my watch and telling myself I'd give them 10 more minutes to finish up. But then, there was a massive crash, like a piece of furniture being knocked over. Right after that, a blood-curdling scream rang out, making me jump out of my seat. I rushed to my door, intending to run upstairs and see what was happening. But the moment I touched the doorknob, all the noise stopped. The sudden silence made me hesitate. I stood there for a few seconds, listening intently. There wasn't another sound, so I went back inside. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of religion practiced such bizarre rituals. Over the next 2 days, the total silence from the Wilson apartment started to make me uneasy. On the morning of the 3rd day, someone began pounding on my door. They were clearly in a desperate hurry. When I opened it, I froze. Robert Wilson was standing there, but he looked absolutely pathetic. His face was gaunt and pale, his eyes were sunken, and he had a look of pure terror. His clothes were covered in filth, and a stench so foul wafted off him that I had to hold my breath. He looked at me and wheezed out a plea to call 911, then immediately turned and ran down the stairs. He was in such a rush that he tripped and fell, but he didn't waste a second getting back up to keep running. I felt a deep sense of dread. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and ran up to their apartment. The door was unlocked. When I pushed it open, a horrific smell hit me like a physical wall. I had to stop for a few seconds just to keep from gagging. The scene inside was beyond anything I could have imagined. Every inch of the floor, walls, and furniture was covered in a thick, disgusting residue. Trash was scattered everywhere. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room until I saw their daughter. She was lying motionless, her body curled in a cramped position. I didn't dare get close. I didn't want to disturb the scene if the worst had happened. The police arrived and cordoned off the area. The investigation moved quickly, and the truth they uncovered haunts me to this day. A few weeks before the incident, the girl had fallen ill. Instead of taking her to a hospital, the Wilsons believed she was possessed by a demon. They thought the whole family was infected and needed to be purified. Believing that demons were repelled by filth, they began a sick ritual. They ate their own waste and vomit, repeating the cycle in an uncontrollable frenzy. The noises I had been hearing all those weeks were part of that ritual. The scream I heard that final night was the moment the girl reached her breaking point. She had passed away because her airway became blocked. The Wilsons were arrested, but the court eventually ruled that they suffered from shared psychotic disorder and were not mentally fit to be held criminally responsible. They were acquitted. I moved out of that apartment immediately, taking only my documents, phone, and laptop. To this day, it's not just what I saw that haunts me, it's what I heard and chose to ignore. I live in a sturdy house in a nice neighborhood now, but I still imagine I hear footsteps echoing from the ceiling. Worse yet, there are moments when I swear I can still smell that stench, and hear the faint chanting of people lost in a broken faith. This story is based on a real event from 2005 in Kaohsiung, Taiwan. A young man living below the Wu family frequently heard strange chanting. On the night of April 9th, he heard a terrifying scream followed by silence. 2 days later, Mr. Wu appeared filthy and panicked, asking for help. Upon checking the apartment, the neighbor found the daughter's body in a house filled with filth. The investigation revealed the superstitious family believed they were possessed and performed extreme rituals, including consuming waste. The victim died of a blocked airway, and the family was acquitted due to collective delusional disorder. My name is Emily. About 2 years ago, I was working as a UI/UX designer in San Francisco. The pay wasn't bad, but because it's one of the most expensive cities in the world, I had to watch every penny. Rent took up the biggest chunk of my paycheck, and it was my biggest source of stress. That's why I didn't hesitate when I met Ryan on a project, and he suggested we share an apartment to save money. For starters, Ryan was very polite and easy to talk to. More importantly, I was convinced he was gay. He was always very close with male coworkers and even showed some public affection toward them. I felt safe accepting his offer. The apartment we rented was near downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and had everything we needed. The first few days were totally normal. We kept a respectful distance and didn't interfere in each other's lives. About a week in, I started noticing that Ryan frequently brought strange men home in the evening. At first, it wasn't many, but eventually, it seemed like someone was over every single night. They usually went straight to Ryan's private room and stayed behind closed doors for hours. The house would get very quiet. What bothered me wasn't just the visitors. It was the way they looked at me when they left. Their eyes seemed to be scanning and judging me. One time, I caught a man staring me up and down before he walked out. It made me uncomfortable, but I figured they were just awkward around women and let it go. After about a month, my health started to fail in a strange way. Every morning, I woke up feeling exhausted and sore in every muscle, as if I had been physically tortured. My memory started to fade, my head felt heavy, and I lived in a constant brain fog. My performance at work took a nosedive. During those dark days, Ryan was the perfect roommate. He was so caring, reminding me of deadlines, helping me with my work, and sometimes even cooking for me. I planned to monitor the situation for a few more weeks before seeing a doctor to figure out what was wrong. Then came one night when, after eating a dinner Ryan prepared, I felt so tired I could barely lift my arms or legs. I went to my room and lost consciousness almost as soon as I hit the bed. Sometime later, I woke up in a half-conscious, dazed state. The room was dark. After a few seconds, I jumped in terror when I realized a man was standing right next to my bed. He was wearing only his underwear and was staring intensely at me. I screamed in panic. The man immediately turned and ran out. A moment later, Ryan appeared and flipped on the light. He hurried to explain that it was just his friend who had bad eyesight and had walked into the wrong room. I was too shaken and exhausted to argue. I told Ryan flatly that I wasn't okay with so many strangers coming in and out of the house. Ryan apologized and promised to be more careful. I tried to move on. A few days later, my life changed forever because of a single text message. That morning, Ryan left his phone on the table while he went to shower. I happened to look down just as a notification popped up. She makes me excited. I'll pay triple to get my turn sooner. I stood frozen as I read those words. She. Pay triple. My turn. I repeated those phrases in my head, connecting them to everything that had happened over the last 2 months. The men coming over at night, the way they looked at me, my unusual sleepiness, the chronic exhaustion, and the memory loss. Especially that man in his underwear. My heart started racing, and my head began to spin. I finally understood the truth. Ryan wasn't gay. He was a sick, twisted predator. He had been drugging my dinner every night, turning me into a tool for his disgusting transactions right inside our own home. My exhaustion and body aches weren't from overworking. They were the physical aftermath of being abused while I was unconscious. A wave of pure disgust washed over me. I ran to the bathroom and threw up until there was nothing left but bitter bile. I spent hours in the shower, scrubbing myself until my skin was raw and red. I felt so stupid and cheap for being so trusting. I moved out quietly that very night. I couldn't bear to look at Ryan for another second. I felt nothing but pure hatred and revulsion for him. I quit my job, moved to a strange new city, and lived in a daze for a long time. I haven't shared this story with anyone because, besides the fear, I feel a deep sense of shame. One thing haunts me more than anything else. I don't know how many times it happened. I don't know how many men entered that room while I was unconscious. That uncertainty is like a parasite, eating away at my ability to trust anyone. Even now that I'm calmer, I still wonder if I should speak up. I've thought about going to the police, but I have no evidence, no recordings, and no photos. All I have is a text message I saw for a few seconds and a collection of broken memories. My name is Robbie. The story I'm about to tell happened about 9 years ago. Back then, my life revolved entirely around computer screens, deadlines, and pulling all-nighters. Eventually, my body couldn't take it anymore, and I had to be treated for early-stage liver cancer. That was my wake-up call. I realized if I didn't change, I was going to destroy myself. As my health improved, I started getting into outdoor activities. Hiking became my way to build back my strength and give my mind a break. At first, I went with groups, but after a while, I started heading out alone to enjoy the peace and quiet. One day, I went on a trip just like that. I chose a trail that was pretty remote. In a section where there were hardly any footprints, I spotted a cabin. It was tucked away from the main path, surrounded by weeds that were taller than my knees. Trash, old junk, and rusty pieces of metal were scattered all over the place. The roof was sagging, and the wooden walls were rotting. It looked like the place had been abandoned for a long time. I was about to turn around and keep moving when a man in his late 50s suddenly stepped out from behind the cabin. He looked disheveled and messy, but his face seemed kind and natural. He claimed to be the owner and asked me for a small favor. He needed help carrying an old cabinet outside so he could throw it away. I figured I was out there for exercise anyway, so I'd be a nice guy and help him out. After we finished, he insisted that I stay for a cup of tea as a thank you. As we sat inside the dark, musty cabin, he started telling me his life story. He claimed he used to own a big ranch at the base of the mountain, but a business partner scammed him out of everything. He said his family had split up, which is why he moved up here to live like a hermit. I felt bad for him, so I shared a bit about my own struggle, how I had just survived a major illness and had to have part of my liver removed because of cancer. The moment I mentioned that, his eyes lit up. He said, "What a coincidence. I have this specific tea that is amazing for the liver. Let me fix a cup for you." He went into the back for about 5 minutes and returned with a ceramic mug. As soon as he handed it to me, I noticed the print on the side. It was a photo of a family of 4, but the man in the picture was definitely not him. The liquid inside the cup was pitch black, which made me hesitate. I didn't drink it right away. Instead, I told him I'd wait for it to cool down. He sat down and kept talking about how great the tea was, but his eyes were locked onto me. It made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. He kept reminding me to drink up, but when I lifted the cup, the smell made me wince. It was a pungent, foul odor, almost like something was rotting. I pretended to take a sip, claiming it was still too hot. When he looked away for a second, I poured almost the entire cup onto the floor and acted like I had finished it. He looked at the empty cup, then looked at me. I made an excuse that it was getting dark and I had to get down the mountain immediately. He didn't try to stop me. He just stood in the doorway of the cabin, staring at my back as I walked away. The hike back down was the longest walk of my life. I had this constant, icy feeling that someone was stalking me through the bushes. I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching behind me, but I didn't dare stop for even a second to catch my breath. Near the exit of the forest, I ran into two locals. They looked surprised to see me alone and warned me that several people had gone missing in this area recently. I told them about the man I had just met. They told me that the cabin used to belong to a long-time resident, but that man had died mysteriously a few years ago. When his body was found, it was so badly decomposed that they couldn't even determine the cause of death. More importantly, they told me that the area was part of a nature preserve. It was illegal for anyone to build a house or live there permanently. When I asked about the liver tea, they told me that any herbal tea meant for the liver should be light yellow or slightly cloudy, never pitch black. That was when the reality hit me. I had just escaped a brush with death. I am convinced that man was a criminal on the run, or maybe even the person who murdered the original owner to take over the cabin. That family mug was likely a relic from his victim. That black tea was almost certainly poisoned, and he had been following me, waiting for the toxin to kick in so he could catch me when I collapsed. I thought about calling the police, but I never did. All I had were guesses. I had no hard evidence or witnesses other than two locals who only knew pieces of an old story. That experience has never left my mind. Since that day, I have never gone hiking alone again. My name is Richard. 10 years ago, back in high school, I was very close with two guys named Thomas and Jim. Those two were famous at school for getting into all kinds of trouble. They skipped class, got into fights, and hosted private parties with alcohol and drugs. I wasn't exactly a bad kid, but I was a people pleaser. I was so afraid of being seen as weak by my peers that I just quietly followed along with their reckless behavior. Thomas lived with his parents in an isolated house on the edge of town. His parents were rarely home, which made his place the go-to spot for our hangouts. Everything started on a Saturday night when I agreed to go to a party at Thomas's house. The air inside was thick with smoke, and the music was blaring so loud it was deafening. Just a few minutes after I arrived, Jim suddenly shoved a small pill into my hand. He told me that everyone should try it at least once. I held that pill for a long time, hesitant. Finally, I closed my eyes and swallowed it just like they asked. Only a few minutes later, everything began to change. At first, I felt light and floaty, as if my body had no weight. But very quickly, all the sounds around me became distorted and stretched out in a very uncomfortable way. I started hearing whispers right next to my ear, but every time I turned around, nobody was there. Then, I saw a silhouette standing in the corner of the room. I walked toward it without thinking, feeling a wave of intense anxiety. When I was just a few steps away, the figure suddenly vanished completely. I stood there, frozen and confused for a few seconds. Then, I remembered I needed to find Jim or Thomas to help me get out of this terrifying state. But they completely ignored what I was saying. They just kept dancing and jumping around. I tried to scream louder, but no sound would come out of my mouth. Then Thomas and Jim walked out of the room, and I stumbled after them. As soon as I stepped through the doorway, I froze in terror. I was facing a bizarre entity at the end of the hallway. At first, it was just a dark patch, but it became clearer as it crawled toward me. It looked human, but its body was long and stretched out. Its movements were twisted and followed no logical pattern. I stood there, paralyzed, watching it get closer. When it was about 6 feet away, it opened its mouth wide, so wide it looked like it wanted to swallow me whole. I lost all control over my body. I just stared into its pitch black mouth. Just as I felt a cold chill from the creature touch my skin, another dark shadow suddenly appeared. It charged forward at an incredible speed and slammed into the monster that was closing in on me, knocking it far away. The impact was so violent that I felt the floor shake. My head started spinning, and then darkness swallowed everything. I woke up when the sun was starting to rise. I was lying in the second-floor hallway, near the stairs leading down to the living room. My whole body ached, as if I had been jumped by a group of people. My mind felt empty and dry. I crawled up and gripped the handrail to look downstairs. What I saw has haunted me for the last 10 years. Jim was lying motionless at the bottom of the stairs. His neck was bent at a sharp angle, his eyes were wide open, and his mouth was agape. Blood from his head had pooled into a large, dry stain. Thomas was sitting nearby, clutching his head and whispering something to himself. When he saw me, he panicked and said that Jim had slipped and fallen while he was high. I couldn't think clearly because I was so terrified. The police arrived and ruled it an accident caused by loss of behavioral control. Both Thomas and I were put on probation for a while because of the drugs. After that, I cut off all contact with Thomas. I transferred schools and tried to live a normal, honest life to erase the filthy memories of that night. 10 years passed peacefully until a night early this past May. Thomas showed up at my front door looking like a total wreck. His eyes were sunken and bloodshot, and he smelled strongly of booze and cigarettes, a man clearly rotted to the bone by addiction. He told me flatly that he had just caused a hit-and-run accident and needed to borrow my car to handle the situation. I refused immediately because I didn't want to be involved in any more trouble. But his attitude changed instantly. He looked me straight in the eye and said he knew exactly what happened 10 years ago. He claimed the person who pushed Jim down the stairs wasn't him. It was me. Thomas insisted he had clear and solid proof, and if I didn't help him, he would take everything to the police. At that moment, I felt my world collapse. The fragmented memories I had tried to forget began to rush back. I remembered the monster and the second dark shadow that appeared afterward. The monster was almost certainly Jim falling down the stairs. But what about that other shadow? If that was actually me in a drug-induced blackout, then there is a high chance what Thomas said is the truth. The uncertainty makes everything scarier than any actual answer could be. Thomas saw the hesitation in my eyes. He snatched my car keys off the table and drove off into the night, leaving me standing alone in my silent living room. Now, I don't know what to do next. The peace I spent 10 years building has shattered like glass. I am living in total terror, afraid of the police, afraid of Thomas, but most of all, afraid of myself. The man who might have blood on his hands while living like an innocent person for a decade. I am harboring a terrifying family secret. I was born into a wealthy family and never wanted for anything. But inside our home, there was always a suffocating feeling, the feeling of being watched and controlled. The person behind that feeling was my father. My parents divorced when I was 10. I stayed with my dad, and my mom started a new family of her own. My father never screamed or hit me. He rarely even raised his voice, but his eyes always made me feel like I was standing in a courtroom. To him, everything had to be perfect. There were no exceptions. Then one day, I found the answer to everything in an old diary. It was hidden deep inside a locked wooden box in the corner of the storage room. Next to it were several report cards with failing grades under the name Samson. The first few pages were filled with heavy, pressured notes. April 12th, failed another class. Dad will kill me if he finds out I'm off the school roster. I have to create a cover story. I'll tell them I'm working as a rescue diver. My parents seem so proud. I'm safe for now. May 20th. I took it even further. I told them I got a job at SpaceX. Mom cried tears of joy. I shouldn't have done it, but I can't turn back now. As the diary went on, it stopped being a journal and turned into a plan to destroy himself just to escape reality. The start date for the fake job is coming up. What do I do? Anything to avoid going to Florida for work. An accident. Falling down the stairs, a broken leg, a traumatic brain injury. I have to suffer something. Or everything. The worse it is, the more they will pity me. Samson's mental state began to turn extreme and hateful when things didn't go his way. The handwriting became a jagged scrawl, tearing into the paper. He found out. He called me a failure and a disgrace. He gave me an ultimatum. I have to confess the truth to everyone next week. No! I would rather lose everything than be humiliated. If they aren't here anymore, the secret stays a secret forever. That's it. I have to make them all disappear. The next page horrified me. Samson had outlined a meticulous process to wipe out his family, writing about it with great pride. A small dose every day. It's very hard to detect. Then, once the chemicals have built up, it will look like a natural stroke. No one would ever suspect a son with a brain injury sitting in a wheelchair. And then, the last line of that chapter was very short, but it haunts me to this day. They both died in the same week, finally free. I sat in silence for a very long time, because Samson, the owner of this diary, is my father. According to what I heard from adults growing up, my paternal grandparents died early from food poisoning combined with underlying health issues. The police found no signs of foul play. It was ruled a tragic accident. But this diary told a different story. After their deaths, my father inherited the entire estate and the insurance money. He got married, and then he had me. I started thinking back on everything from my childhood through my adult years. The way my father checked my grades every single day. He never trusted my word. He always demanded proof. I once caught him reading my text messages while I was asleep. He never admitted to it. Every relationship I had also had to be clearly reported to him. I used to think it was just overprotective control. Now I understand it was fear. My father is terrified that I will become the version of him from years ago. A liar, a failure, someone willing to do terrible things to protect a facade. He only trusts himself and his absolute control. My father always replaces every spice and seasoning in the kitchen on a fixed cycle. He always prepares the food himself whenever he can. And he especially hates it when other people touch his drinks. It isn't just him being a perfectionist like I once thought. It is the obsession of a man living with his own crimes. Since reading that diary, I can't look at my father the same way. I haven't told anyone this secret. Keeping quiet is a heavy burden. Even though he committed a horrific crime, he is still my father. It happened so long ago that digging it up would only leave us in ruins. I have accepted that I will continue to live this controlled life for now. But I am determined to live honestly. No covers, no disguises. I will work hard to earn my own way, and then I will leave this house as soon as I can. I have kept this secret buried for 40 years. It was a horrific night on duty that I still cannot forget. It is the reason I walked away from the police force, despite working so hard to get that job in the first place. I was 21 years old at the time. I had just been hired in a poor, coastal district that lacked almost everything. During a night patrol shift, my partner and I received a call from residents near the South Beach. They said they saw something resembling a body washed up on the sand. We drove to the scene. When we arrived, we froze. It was the naked body of an adult man. Even worse, the corpse had no head. The cut at the neck was jagged, and the seawater had washed the remaining blood to a pale white. Back then, our equipment was primitive. Even the radio in our car was broken. After a quick discussion, we had to split up. My partner would drive back to the station to report and bring the forensics team in the morning, while I had to stay behind to guard the scene. I was young, inexperienced, and desperate to keep my job, so I agreed to stay. I stood a safe distance from the body and kept watch. The night became eerily still. There wasn't a breath of wind, only the steady, rhythmic sound of waves hitting the shore. The silence of the ocean at night has a strange, hypnotic power. I sat on a rock a few yards from the body, straining my eyes into the dark. But after several exhausting shifts, and in that absolute quiet, my mind began to fade. I told myself I'd just close my eyes for a second, but I fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up, the sun hadn't quite risen. My heart stopped when I looked at the spot on the sand. The body was gone. I was in a total panic. If the investigators arrived and the scene was empty, I would be fired or severely disciplined for sleeping on duty. In a desperate frenzy, I ran along the shoreline, hoping the body had just drifted into a nearby rock crevice. After walking a long way, I saw a man crouching behind a large reef. He was holding a small hatchet. I ran toward him, intending to ask if he had seen anything unusual. But the moment he saw me, he looked incredibly guilty. His eyes darted around, and his hands trembled as he tried to hide the axe behind his back. Before I could say a word, he stammered, "I didn't mean to. It was an accident. I just wanted to hide him for a while." I stopped in my tracks, my hand instinctively dropping to my holster. I realized right then that this man was the killer. He had returned in the night to drag the body away while I was asleep. But before I could draw my weapon, he lunged at me like a cornered animal, swinging the hatchet. Everything happened so fast. We struggled, and he attacked me with a crazed strength, clearly trying to eliminate the witness. In a split-second fight for survival, with the blade inches from my neck, I pulled my gun and fired. The bullet hit him square in the forehead. He dropped instantly. It took a long time for me to process what I had done. I looked at the man I had just shot, then out at the empty beach. I had killed a murderer, but I had done it while failing my duty. If I told the truth, my career would be over because I had lost the original crime scene. In a state of pure terror and desperation, I made the darkest decision of my life to save myself. I dragged the killer's body into a hidden crevice and stripped him naked. I used his own hatchet to take his head. I threw the head and his clothes into the deep ocean to erase his identity. Then, I hauled this new, headless body back to the beach and placed it exactly where the first victim had been. My plan was to turn the killer into the victim I was supposed to be guarding. A short while later, when my partner returned with the investigators, I luckily reported that the scene remained untouched. They examined the headless corpse, and since it matched the original description, they never suspected a thing. However, that secret became a life sentence for my soul. To this day, I still don't know where the original victim's body went, whether the killer hid it elsewhere or the tide swept it away. I used a barbaric act to protect my career. I swapped the villain for the victim just to cover up a few minutes of sleep. I resigned from the force shortly after. For 40 years, I have lived with an unquenchable guilt. I constantly wonder who the real victim was and how their family suffered when they vanished without a trace. I will take this secret to my grave, knowing that the justice I swore to protect was strangled by my own hands on that fateful night. Back then, my parents both worked long hours, so I was raised by a nanny named Carol. She was always there in the afternoons, carrying a heavy scent of perfume and speaking in a soft, airy voice. Carol didn't teach me normal childhood games like building blocks or coloring. Instead, she told me strange stories, and she constantly talked about the other world. One afternoon, she led me into the bathroom. She told me she was going to teach me a special game called the bathtub game. She was very clear about the rules. First, I had to play alone. No one else could be in the room. Second, I had to mix the water with plenty of soap and a dark liquid she had prepared, until the water became so murky that it no longer reflected anything. Third, I had to endure the scalding hot water without crying out in pain, and I wasn't allowed to turn my head, no matter what I heard. And most importantly, I had to believe in what I saw and wait until the light completely disappeared. I asked her what the prize was for winning, and Carol said I would gain freedom. The way she said it made the prize sound irresistible, and I immediately agreed to play. Everything was set. I stepped into the bathtub. The water was painfully hot, but I forced myself to endure it. I sat down, took a deep breath, and slowly submerged my head. As soon as I was underwater, I felt a powerful force pulling me down deeper. I slowly opened my eyes, but the water was cloudy. I couldn't see anything except for a blurry spot where the drain was located. At first, it looked normal, but after a few seconds, the drain began to stretch out like a wide, gaping mouth. It started to vibrate as if it were alive. Around the edges, things that looked like hands appeared. Long, thin, distorted fingers gripping the rim of the drain. I was terrified, nearly forgetting that I was underwater. I opened my mouth to scream and immediately began to choke on the water. I tried to resurface, but a massive weight was pressing down on my back. I spiraled into a panic, my body thrashing instinctively to escape, but the more I struggled, the closer I was pulled toward that hole. Those hands began to move, reaching up toward me slowly. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't think of anything except getting out at any cost. The pressure in my chest felt like it was going to explode. My vision blurred, and then the light truly vanished. Not because I closed my eyes, but because everything around me sank into total darkness. Everything ended abruptly, and I lost all sensation. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My parents were standing beside me, looking incredibly worried. They said I had fainted in the tub due to carelessness, and that I was lucky Carol had found me in time to save me. No one mentioned the game or asked why I did it, and I didn't tell them. But the most haunting part wasn't what I went through. It was the feeling that I had lost. I failed to finish the game, and because of that, I never received the freedom Carol had promised. As I grew up, I tried to recreate that game many times. I followed every step and every rule perfectly, but nothing ever happened. No hands, no pulling force, no widening drain, just normal water and silence. I slowly realized that the door probably only opens once, and I had missed my chance. A few days ago, I told this story to my son. He wasn't scared. Instead, he was fascinated. He asked me about the rules, about Carol, and about the prize. Finally, he asked me if he would win if he did everything right. I didn't answer him. Now, I am standing outside the bathroom door. My son is inside. I heard the sound of water splashing at first, but now, everything has gone silent. My hand is on the doorknob. All I have to do is turn it, and I could pull him out and end this right now. A part of me wants to do it immediately, but another part whispers that if I do, I will steal the only chance he has to win the game that I lost. I stand perfectly still, not moving, hardly daring to breathe. My phone is buzzing constantly with calls and texts from my ex-husband because I took our son from his house without permission. But I don't care. My name is Kane. I live in a rural part of West Texas, a place defined by bone-dry fields and long, straight highways that seem to stretch on forever. I have a small family with a wife and a daughter. Our lives would be perfect if I didn't constantly have to clean up the messes made by my younger brother Roger, who just refused to grow up. Roger got hooked on drugs, and that brought a whole mess of trouble. Debt, street fights, and constant lies. 2 days before everything went sideways, he called me asking where he could score. I knew immediately he was looking for meth. I lost my temper, yelled at him, and slammed the phone down. It wasn't our first fight, but it was the meanest thing I'd ever said to him. The next night, I heard he got into a huge blowout with his fiancée and vanished into the night. I wasn't too worried at first because he'd pulled stunts like this before. That changed 2 days later. Near midnight, my phone rang. It was Roger. His voice was frantic and out of breath. He sounded like he was in deep trouble. He said he was driving down Highway 277 and was about to run out of gas. More importantly, he claimed 3 men were hunting him down. My first reaction was doubt. Every time he talked about shadow people or men outside the door, it had always been a drug-induced hallucination. I snapped at him, told him to get his act together, and hung up. But 2 minutes later, the guilt ate at me. I woke up my wife, and we drove out to Highway 277. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep knowing he might be out there. That road is desolate at night. No streetlights, no houses, just empty space. When we got close to the spot Roger described, I saw his car pulled over on the shoulder, looking like it had been abandoned in a massive hurry. I stepped out and called his name, but the only response was the wind. Right then, my phone buzzed. It was Roger again. He whispered that he was close by, watching me. I spun around and scanned the darkness, but I saw absolutely nothing. I asked for his exact location, but his answers were vague and confused. Then, I saw police lights in the distance. I found out later that a passing truck driver had seen the abandoned car and called it in. The moment I told Roger the cops were arriving, his mood flipped. He had an active warrant, so he panicked. He told me not to trust the police and to leave immediately. Then, the line went dead. I stood there looking at his car, then out at the pitch-black fields, believing he was just hiding in the brush. Once again, I decided to cover for him. I told the officer that my brother had just run out of gas and was walking to find a station. The officer checked the car, found nothing suspicious, and eventually drove off. My wife and I stayed for a while, driving slowly up and down the highway. We called out for Roger and tried his phone dozens of times, but he never picked up again. Exhausted, and assuming he was just hiding until the coast was clear, we eventually went home. The next morning, the car was still there. His fiancée called to say he never made it home. That was when the real fear started to sink in. A massive search was launched. K9 units, helicopters, and infrared cameras scanned every inch of the land surrounding Highway 277. They found nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no Roger. The police eventually concluded that he was intentionally a missing person on the run from his warrant. They searched the area multiple times over the following weeks. Still, not a single clue turned up. 4 days after he vanished, Roger's fiancée checked his phone records and found a chilling detail. That night, Roger had called 911. Given his history, Roger would have avoided the police at all costs. If he called 911, it meant he was truly terrified for his life. When the police played the recording for me, my blood turned to ice. That wasn't the voice of someone tripping on drugs. Roger was screaming, sobbing, and begging for help. He said he was being chased through the fields. Even scarier, in the background of the tape, you could hear the distinct crunching of footsteps on dry grass and the cold, muffled voice of another man right before the call cut out. The last thing my brother ever said was, "They're out here." That was the last time I ever heard his voice. For years, the case went cold. The area was searched again and again with better technology, but it always came up empty. 8 years later, a group of volunteers went back to that same stretch of highway. This time, they found a pair of shorts, a piece of a shoe, and part of a human skull. It was all lying right there in the open field, very close to where the car had been left. DNA tests confirmed it was Roger. We finally found him, or what was left of him. But instead of closure, I only felt more haunted. That entire area had been picked over with a fine-tooth comb by professionals and dogs 8 years prior. There is no way they missed remains lying in plain sight. To this day, I am left with 2 dark theories. First, that every single law enforcement officer and search dog was so blind that they missed a body in a way that is almost impossible to believe. Second, that on that night, Roger was actually taken away to another place. And after many years, the killer, or someone who knew the truth, brought his bones and belongings back to that field and placed them there as a sick, silent taunt. I don't know which part is more terrifying, the silence or the memory. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there, standing next to that empty car in the dead of night. I can still hear Roger's voice whispering through the phone, insisting that he was right here. I blame myself for not doing more to find him at that exact moment. Maybe if I had searched harder, everything would have turned out differently. His final words will haunt me for the rest of my life. They're out here. And then, everything went silent.
My name is Rachel. I'm 25 years old and live in San Diego. I have a steady job, and I'm currently in a very sweet relationship with a guy named Ethan. Ethan lives alone in a spacious house in an extremely quiet neighborhood. As our relationship grew more serious, I started visiting him on weekends, and eventually I began staying over more often. However, right from those first few nights, I felt like something was wrong. You know that feeling when you just know someone is staring at you even though your eyes are closed? It was exactly like that. It was most intense when Ethan and I were being intimate. I always felt like I was being watched in a sick, voyeuristic way. Several times, I would jump and instinctively push Ethan away because, out of the corner of my eye, I swore I saw a dark silhouette standing in the corner of the room. But every time I turned on the light to look closer, no one was there. Ethan asked me if I was okay many times, but I always told him it was nothing. I just didn't know how to explain it to him. I've always been a heavy sleeper. At my own apartment, I drift off in minutes. But every time I stayed at Ethan's, my body refused to rest. I would toss and turn for hours, then wake up suddenly in the middle of the night for no reason. Sometimes I'd wake up with my heart racing and my body ice cold, but I could never remember what I'd been dreaming about. The house was dead silent at night, but that silence only made me more restless. It all came to a head one night around 3 in the morning while Ethan was fast asleep. I looked around the room and gasped when I saw a figure flicker past. I couldn't see a face, but the shape was definitely that of a woman. I froze for a few seconds before shaking Ethan awake. At that point, I could only come to one conclusion. Ethan was hiding someone. Maybe it was another woman. Maybe she had a key, or maybe she was sneaking in whenever I wasn't around. Ethan insisted he only loved me. To prove it, he turned on every light in the house and walked me through every room to check. There was no one. There were no signs of a break-in. Ethan wasn't annoyed at all. He comforted me and even mentioned he would renovate the house so I would feel more comfortable. I was touched and figured I was just overthinking everything. But over the following days, things got much worse. I started hearing a woman's laughter at night. The first time it happened, it was so faint and disappeared so fast that I thought I'd imagined it. But after that, it became clearer and more frequent. It was a high-pitched, broken sound, partly excited, partly painful, and definitely female. I didn't tell Ethan because I was starting to doubt my own sanity. I figured sleep deprivation was causing a mental breakdown and making me hallucinate. Then, one night, I woke up to that sound again. This time, it was coming from the backyard. Without turning on the lights, I quietly slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway to the back door. The laughing continued, sometimes stopping, sometimes erupting into trembling fits. I unlocked the inner glass door but kept the outer iron security gate locked tight. Peering through the narrow gaps between the bars, I looked out into the yard. I went numb. Right on the other side of the gate leading to the back alley, a girl was crouching on the ground. She was bone-thin, her hair was matted to her face, and her skin was a ghostly pale white that stood out in the dark. The most horrific part was that she was biting her own fingers. I saw her teeth sink deep into her flesh, and then she used her other hand to rip away small pieces of herself, tossing them into the yard. Blood was streaming down her wrists, but she had a look of pure delight on her face. Sensing my presence, she stopped. She slowly lifted her head and looked directly at me through the bars. Her smile grew wider, and her eyes lit up with excitement. She crawled closer to the gate and in a distorted voice begged me to let her in.
Please let me in. I want to see Ethan. Please. I love him so much. I miss him.
I stared at her bulging eyes and her bright red mouth that spat blood as she spoke. Her mangled, chewed-off hand kept reaching through the bars toward me. I let out a blood-curdling scream to release all my terror. I squeezed my hand shut, closed my eyes tight, and in that exact moment, I bolted upright. I opened my eyes to find myself in the bedroom, my hair and the back of my shirt soaked with sweat. A worried Ethan was holding my shoulders. I sobbed uncontrollably, describing every detail of the woman's face and her self-mutilation. Immediately, I saw Ethan's face turn deathly pale. His eyes filled with a look of panic and guilt that I had never seen before. After a long, suffocating silence, Ethan slowly told me about Claire. Claire was his ex-girlfriend. He had broken up with her after realizing she was mentally unstable. But after the breakup, Claire became a frantic stalker. She followed him, harassed him, and broke into his house multiple times. It all reached a breaking point one night when Claire broke in and attacked Ethan in a total loss of control. Ethan told me that in a state of extreme panic and self-defense, he had accidentally killed her. The police later ruled it as self-defense during a psychological crisis, and Ethan was acquitted. As I listened, the room felt like it was spinning. It turned out the dark shadow, the laughter, and the woman tearing at her own flesh. They were all images of Claire. Everything between Ethan and me changed after that night. Even though we are still dating, and even though Ethan is still a kind man and I love him very much, an unbridgeable gap has opened between us. Every time he holds me, every time we are close, I can't escape the thought that these hands once took a life. My name is Laura, and I work in marketing for a media company in Denver, Colorado. To tell you a little bit about my interests, I am a huge animal lover, especially dogs. However, I don't have a dog of my own right now because my current living situation just doesn't allow for it. I have a close coworker named Stella. We share the same love for animals, and Stella has a golden retriever named Milo. I usually drop by her place on the weekends to play with Milo just to get my dog fix. Through our casual chats, Stella told me about two couples who lived in her neighborhood that she was very close with. For the sake of the story, and to protect their privacy, I'll just call them Couple A and Couple B. They all met while walking their dogs at the local dog park and became fast friends. I had met them a few times at Stella's house.
Couple A seemed very intellectual. The husband was a lawyer and the wife was a teacher. Couple B was more high energy. Both of them worked in the creative industry. Seeing the way they pampered their dogs and laughed together, anyone would have thought this was a textbook example of a perfect friendship. Everything seemed perfectly normal until one specific night. That evening, I stopped by Stella's house to pick up my phone. I had left it at the office, and Stella was kind enough to bring it home for me. I arrived just as Stella and the two couples were having a small wine party. They even let their dogs run around together in the house. They invited me to stay and join the party, and I happily agreed. At first, the atmosphere was very relaxed and cozy. Stella and the couples talked about work and shared tips on raising pets. I didn't drink much because I mostly wanted to play with the dogs. But then, as the wine bottles started to run dry, the mood of the party began to take a terrifying turn. The jokes, which started out harmless, suddenly took on a sharp, bitter edge. I started to get goosebumps when the husband from couple A began making aggressive, mocking remarks toward his wife and the husband from couple B. At first, I thought he was just drunk, but the tension in the eyes of all four of them made my blood run cold. Stella seemed to notice it too. She became quiet, just sitting there listening and occasionally glancing at me with a look of pure confusion and worry. The subtle jabs quickly escalated into blunt insults. The air in the room became thick with tension. Even the three dogs stopped playing and stayed still. The peak of the tragedy happened in the blink of an eye. The insults turned into screaming matches and heavy accusations of infidelity being thrown in each other's faces. Stella stood up to try and intervene, but at that exact moment, the husband from couple A lunged to his feet. He pulled a handgun from behind his belt and pointed it directly at his wife's face. Stella and I looked at each other in total panic. We didn't say a word, but we moved in perfect sync. The two of us scrambled to grab Milo and the other two dogs, dragging them toward the nearest bathroom. I stumbled over my own feet, using every bit of strength I had to hold on to two of the dogs while my body shook with terror. We locked the bathroom door, and Stella dialed 911. But before the call could even connect, several gunshots rang out right outside the door. We huddled together and burst into tears, while the dogs barked uncontrollably at the noise. Then, a heavy, suffocating silence followed. We didn't dare move or leave our spot. We stayed there until we heard the front door being kicked in, the sound of heavy boots, and the voices of officers barking orders. We knew the police had finally arrived. When we stepped out, even though I had tried to prepare myself, I was still completely shocked by the scene in front of me. The wife who had the gun pointed at her was lying motionless on the floor, her body covered in blood. The husband from couple B was the same way. His head was unrecognizable from the multiple shots that had hit him. The shooter had already been tackled and restrained by the police. He just sat there, his eyes empty and wild. The wife from couple B was collapsed in the corner of the room, having a total mental breakdown. The room that was once filled with laughter had turned into a horrific crime scene. The days that followed were filled with long sessions at the police station. We had to remember and retell every single detail of what we saw over and over again. After weeks of investigation, the bitter truth finally came out. It turned out that the wife from couple A and the husband from couple B had been having a secret affair for a long time. Those dog-walking dates at the park were actually secret meetings. When the husband from couple A found out, his simmering jealousy turned a cozy wine night into a massacre. Stella moved out of that neighborhood immediately after the incident. To this day, we are still haunted by it. We haven't been able to escape the memory of that night of horror. I've started to pay much closer attention to the way people talk to one another. I realize that being close to someone doesn't always mean they are being sincere. Sometimes, the relationships that look the most perfect are built on the most dangerous secrets.
A single moment of peace can turn into a tragedy in just a few minutes.
Hi everyone, I'm Bennett. I'm 29 years old and I live and work in Los Angeles. The story I'm about to tell you happened about 6 months ago, right at the Lafayette apartment complex where I had just moved in. At the time, I had only been in the area for about a month. Since I work as a freelancer from home, my world mostly revolved around my four walls and a computer screen. To keep myself from going stir-crazy, I started a habit of going out for a walk every evening. During those walks, I started noticing a woman who looked homeless. She wore filthy clothes, her hair was matted, and she usually sat on the ground in front of a nearby convenience store, chain smoking. Every now and then, she would give passers-by a very cold, unpleasant look. One day, I saw her getting into a heated argument with the store owner. The reason was simple. She didn't have any money, but was stubbornly demanding a pack of cigarettes. The owner, a pretty tough guy, lost his temper and started shouting. Eventually, he had to call the cops to get her removed. At the time, I just thought she was an out-of-control addict who was more pity than anything else. After that day, she disappeared for a while, and I almost completely forgot she existed. That was until one night when I was walking home late from a bar. As I passed the closed convenience store, I saw two silhouettes standing in a dark corner on the side of the building. They were making some suggestive noises, and I couldn't help my curiosity, so I stopped to look. I immediately realized it was the homeless woman and the store owner. They were standing very close to each other, and the vibe was incredibly strange and shady. She had her hand on his chest, something, while the owner stood perfectly still, seemingly accepting the touch. They looked like a couple having a secret affair. I found it hard to wrap my head around, but since it wasn't my business, I just kept walking home. A short time later, a shocking rumor started spreading through the apartment complex. The convenience store owner was dead. His body was found at his home in a state of heavy decomposition. The initial word on the street was that it was a suicide. I was stunned, thinking that maybe the pressures of life had finally pushed him over the edge. About 2 weeks after the owner's death, the homeless woman reappeared, and this time, she actively approached me. While I was out on my walk, she walked up to me, the heavy stench of cigarette smoke blowing right into my face. With a blank expression but a very suggestive tone, she asked me to buy her a pack of cigarettes because she was broke. Before I could even say no, she added a kicker. She promised she would do whatever I wanted in return. She even flashed me right there in the middle of the street. In that moment, I felt a mix of disgust and a strange sense of curiosity. I wasn't tempted by her appearance at all, but I wanted to know exactly what this trade was. I bought the cigarettes, and after she took them, she signaled for me to follow her. She led me into a dark alley. The deeper we went, the colder and quieter the air became. Near the end of the alley, I saw a car parked there. The lights were off and the windows were tinted, but I could clearly feel that someone was sitting inside, watching us. I started to hesitate and asked her again about the trade. She gave me a vague answer, intentionally dodging the question, and told me to just walk a little further. But ahead of us was a dead end in that suspicious car. When I firmly refused and turned to leave, her attitude flipped instantly. She grabbed my arm tight, her voice becoming frantic and pleading. She begged me to stay for just 5 more minutes. Right then, a massive alarm bell went off in my head. She didn't want to trade her body. She was trying to stall for time so the person in the car could make their move. I yanked my arm away and ran out of that alley with every bit of strength I had. Just seconds later, I heard a car door click open. I glanced back and saw a tall man stepping out of the vehicle. He stood perfectly still in the shadows, staring intently at my back as I fled. He didn't chase me, but his gaze was so cold that I'm convinced I just narrowly escaped a death sentence. I ran all the way home, locked the door tight, and collapsed on the floor. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode out of my chest. A few days later, the police released some of the investigation results regarding the store owner's murder. Once again, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. I was horrified. The owner hadn't committed suicide. He had been murdered in a blackmail or robbery trap. Everything immediately clicked in my mind based on what I had seen. That homeless woman was likely just the bait, and the man in the car was the one who actually did the deed. The store owner had probably been lured into a similar trade before, but he didn't get the chance to run like I did. I went to the police and told them the whole story, but the woman had vanished once again without a trace. To this day, the case remains unsolved. Whenever I look back on it, I still shudder, realizing that if I had been a little slower or just a bit more curious that night, I might not be sitting here to tell this story.
My name is Daniel. I was a delivery driver in New York City for nearly 6 years before I got caught up in a scam, lost my job, and ended up homeless. I lived on the streets, mostly hanging around the subway stations in Manhattan. During those dark months, I was lucky to have Vincent. Vincent was older than me. He always had a scruffy beard, and his jacket constantly smelled like old cigarettes. But he was kind and warm-hearted. We didn't ask about each other's pasts. We just treated each other with genuine respect. One day, Vincent told me he was heading down to the downtown area because tourists there were more likely to give out spare change. But after he left, nearly 2 days passed and he didn't come back. I started to get really restless. On the second night after Vincent left, I had a terrifying nightmare. I saw Vincent lying on the cold concrete, writhing in pain. His hands were clutching his stomach, and his face was twisted and purple from an unbearable agony. The dream worried me so much that the next morning, I decided to go look for him. I went to all his usual spots. I asked around the subway stations and checked the alleys where homeless people usually gathered, but nobody had any news about Vincent. Later that afternoon, while I was walking along a sidewalk, I heard a man scream in terror. He was another homeless man. He stumbled for a few steps and then collapsed. His body shook violently, his hands gripped his stomach, and his face became deformed with pain. Death came for him very quickly. The people around us just stood there, frozen in shock. I got goosebumps. The scene in front of me was exactly like the dream I had about Vincent. As it started to get dark, I headed back to my usual spot. My stomach was growling with hunger, and my feet were sore. Right then, I saw a well-dressed man standing on the corner handing out free sandwiches to the homeless. News about food travels fast. I walked over and received a neatly wrapped sub from him. I found a quiet corner, sat down, and shakily began to unwrap the paper. The smell of the meat made my mouth water. But just as I was about to take a bite, a voice whispered right in my ear, "Daniel, run." It was clearly Vincent's voice. I spun around, but there was nothing behind me but a brick wall. No one was there. While I was sitting there confused, another homeless man suddenly rushed at me. He snatched the sandwich right out of my hand and took off running. Hunger and anger flared up inside me, and I immediately chased after him. I caught up to him in a narrow, trash-filled alley behind a building. He had already managed to wolf down half of the sandwich. I was so frustrated that I punched him hard in the face and cursed at him. I turned to walk away, but after only a few steps, I heard a strange noise behind me. I looked back and was horrified to see the young man collapse. His body curled up, his hands gripped his stomach, and his moans faded away until he was silent. I stood there, paralyzed. I wasn't sure if he died because of the sandwich or because of my punch. Then I looked at his contorted body and the remains of the sandwich on the ground. It hit me like a ton of bricks. He had been poisoned. I hurried around to the back of the building to get away from the scene, and right there, in a dark corner next to some metal dumpsters, I saw a familiar shape. I walked closer, my legs shaking so hard I could barely stand. It was Vincent. He had passed away some time ago. His body was curled up, and his hands were clutching his stomach, exactly like in my dream. Next to his body was a scrap of a sandwich, exactly like the one I had just held, but it had already started to grow green mold. The shock was so great that my emotions felt frozen. I stared at Vincent for a long time, and everything that had happened over the last 2 days began to click together. I realized that the charitable man passing out sandwiches was actually a serial killer. His targets were homeless people like us, people whose deaths might go unnoticed or unremembered. Those free sandwiches were his murder weapons. Later, the police got involved when the number of deaths around the subway stations increased unusually fast. All the bodies were found in the same position, curled up, clutching their stomachs. I told the police everything I could remember about the man's face, but he had vanished without leaving a single trace. To this day, I still don't understand why he did it. Since that day, I have never accepted food from a stranger again. I eventually found a job moving crates and asked to sleep in the warehouse. I'm working hard to make sure my life is no longer defined by wandering the streets or the haunting fear of hunger. And I will always remember Vincent.
My name is Jason. For the past 15 years, I have lived with a silent, heavy haunting. Some things happen that make you regret them for the rest of your life. Not because of what you did, but because of what you chose to ignore. Back then, I was just a young guy starting my first real job. I struggled every day with the crowded New York City subways to get to work. I remember it was a late night, around 9 p.m. at the Times Square station. While I was waiting for my train, a middle-aged woman approached me. She looked pretty disheveled. Her hair was a mess, and her old clothes smelled like damp mold. She started with a very old script. She said she lost her wallet, had no money to get home, and asked for help. I had just started working and hadn't received a paycheck yet. I had exactly one $20 bill in my pocket. Seeing me hesitate, she suddenly lowered her voice, leaned into my ear, and made an insane offer that left me stunned. She asked for $10, and in exchange, she offered a special service. She signaled that I could touch her chest once. As she spoke, she tried to lure me into a deserted corner behind the station pillars. A chill went down my spine. I thought she must be a creep or mentally ill, so I quickly refused and bolted toward the platform as the train arrived. The story should have ended there, but a few days later, I went out for drinks with Eric, who was my best friend at the time. We were sitting at a small bar in Manhattan. We had quite a bit to drink, and as the alcohol started to kick in, I happened to spot that same woman sitting alone at the end of the bar. I pointed her out to Eric and told him about the creepy experience I'd had the other night. Eric burst out laughing. To him, a poor woman offering sex for money wasn't a big deal. It wasn't as scary as I was making it out to be. Eric even started making bets, daring to see if she would actually make the same offer to him. Before I could react, Eric took a big gulp of beer and walked straight toward her. He said a few words, then sat down in the chair next to her. They talked for a long time. She didn't look like she was flirting or being charming at all. After a few minutes, the smile disappeared from Eric's face. Then, the two of them leaned in close. Finally, Eric stood up and walked to the back of the bar with her. I was surprised, but I just sat there and waited. About 10 minutes later, Eric came back alone. He sat down in front of me and confirmed that she had made the exact same offer I described. But Eric's eyes looked a bit glazed over. Usually he was a fast talker, but right then, it took him several seconds to answer my questions. He insisted he was fine and finished the rest of his beer. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured he was just a little drunk, or that the woman had made him uncomfortable. We left the bar around midnight, and that was the last time I saw Eric. The next day, I got a call from his mother. She was worried, saying he hadn't come home, didn't show up for work, and his phone was off. By the end of the day, the police were involved. Months went by with no sign of Eric. Hope turned into exhaustion. There was no funeral and no answers for what happened. At first, I didn't dare tell the whole story about the woman, because I didn't even know what I was suspicious of. Later, I mentioned it to the police, but a story about a woman asking for money in exchange for a grope in a New York City subway station wasn't enough to be a real lead. More than a year later, when almost everyone thought Eric was dead, someone reported seeing a man who looked just like him at a subway station in Brooklyn. I went there with Eric's parents. The man huddled in the corner of the wall was indeed Eric. But it took me several minutes to believe it. He was thin, dressed in rags, and walked with a limp. His hair was hacked off unevenly, revealing patches of scarred scalp. On his wrists were thick calluses and circular scars. One of his arms was clearly weak. When he lifted it, he was slow and clumsy. Standing near Eric, I smelled a long-standing, damp body odor mixed with a sharp antiseptic scent, the kind of smell that only makes you think of a hospital. Eric didn't recognize his parents. He didn't even react when they called his name. His gaze was empty, as if his consciousness was gone. When he was taken to the hospital, the doctor said Eric had suffered a very serious head injury. His cognitive abilities were severely damaged and almost impossible to recover. His body also showed many signs of long-term physical abuse. In the hospital, I watched in horror as Eric chewed his food for a very long time, as if he didn't know how to swallow. Sometimes he would stuff his mouth full of food, his eyes darting around as if he was afraid someone would snatch it away. He even bit on paper towels, the corners of blankets, and anything within reach. All of his reflexes were off and distorted. The thing that haunts me the most is that Eric would mumble very quietly while chewing, $10 for one time, $10 for one time. Every time he said it, his hand would unconsciously reach forward as if he were begging for money. I stood there frozen, the blood in my veins turning to ice. That was the exact offer the woman at the Times Square station had made years ago. I went back to the station and asked some homeless people there. One man told me about a woman who specialized in luring men to follow her, especially young men who were drunk or curious. Those who went with her would be beaten until they were disabled, so they were easier to control, then used for begging. He said it wasn't a new story, it's just that no one ever has proof, and nobody really cares about the people who disappear in the subway. I realized with horror that from the moment Eric came back after those 10 minutes at the bar, he had probably been attacked or injected with some kind of drug. But because I was too drunk and too careless, I let my friend walk away in that dazed state. To this day, Eric lives in a care facility with the mind of a child. I still don't know exactly what happened to him during that missing year, but if I had just been firm and stopped him that night, everything might have been different.
They say everything is bigger in Texas, and that includes the mistakes. I've been a bartender at a riverfront restaurant in Orange since 2011, and I will never forget the summer of 2015, or the customer named Tommy. My name is Gavin. I'm 38 years old. I started working for a man named Al back in 2011. Al had owned his place on the water since the 1960s. The restaurant wasn't fancy, but it had a real charm. Every summer, the place was packed. People came for the burgers, the cold beer, and the river breeze. When the Texas heat got too intense, people would jump straight off the private dock into the water to cool off. It was practically a local tradition. That all changed one day in June of that year. I was behind the bar when I noticed Al standing perfectly still, staring out at the dock. His face was tense, and his eyes were locked on the surface of the river. Before I could ask what was wrong, Al suddenly barked, "Nobody gets in the water anymore." The whole bar went silent for a few seconds. Immediately after, Al grabbed a marker and some paper. He wrote, "No swimming" in huge letters. He taped the signs everywhere, especially near the dock, but he didn't give anyone an explanation. The very next day, those flimsy paper signs were replaced. Al put up a large wooden sign with bright red letters, bolted to a post right at the water's edge. From that point on, swimming was strictly forbidden. The customers started complaining. Many people were annoyed and frustrated because they came there specifically to swim, but Al just kept his mouth shut. Then, around July, Tommy showed up. Tommy was about 28 years old and a regular at the bar. He was a big guy, very confident, and a bit of a hothead, though he wasn't usually a troublemaker. That night, Tommy came in with his girlfriend, Victoria. They played pool and ordered a few drinks like they always did. Close to midnight, as I was wiping down glasses behind the bar, I overheard Tommy say, "I'm jumping in that river tonight." I warned him immediately. "Tommy, you know the rules. No one is allowed in the water. Al banned it." He looked at me with a cocky smirk. "I don't care about that old man's rules," he said. With that, Tommy stood up, grabbed Victoria's hand, and walked out the door. I felt an uneasy pit in my stomach, but the bar was still busy, so I couldn't leave my post right away. About 10 minutes later, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the dock. I grabbed a flashlight and sprinted outside. When I reached the water, I froze. Victoria was standing at the very edge of the dock, soaking wet. She was shaking violently, gasping for air, her face completely white. When she saw me, she tried to speak, but couldn't get the words out. She just kept pointing frantically at the middle of the river. "Tommy, it dragged him under." I didn't ask questions. I swept my flashlight across the water. The beam cut through the ripples, and then I saw it clearly. The water was stained a dark, murky red. Under the light, Tommy's body surfaced face down. His back was arched above the water, perfectly still. But the most horrific part happened a split second later. Just as the light hit Tommy's back, the water underneath him surged upward. Something massive and dark gray rose to the surface at incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, a pair of huge jaws clamped onto Tommy's lower half and yanked him down with terrifying force. His body vanished right before my eyes, as if he had been swallowed by the river itself. The water thrashed wildly, leaving behind spreading red clouds and small pieces of debris floating on the surface. Victoria screamed and collapsed, fainting on the spot. I could only stand there, staring at the water. I knew exactly what those floating pieces were, and I knew exactly which part of the human body they had come from. After the attack, the police and wildlife officials moved in. That was when the truth finally came out. On the day Al had banned swimming, he had seen a massive alligator under the dock with his own eyes. The beast was over 11 feet long and weighed at least 400 pounds. It moved through the water like a silent shadow. Al knew exactly how dangerous it was, but instead of telling the public, he chose to stay quiet. He was terrified that he would lose all his business if the news got out. That's why he only put up the no swimming signs. Everyone knew there were gators in the area, but they were usually small and shy. No one really worried about them. Over time, this one had grown into a monster without anyone noticing. According to the records, Tommy was the first person killed by an alligator in Texas in nearly 200 years. To most people, it was just a shocking news story that faded after a few weeks. But for me, it is a haunting memory that I can never erase. I quit working at Al's place and moved to a local bar far from the river. Now, any large body of water makes me shake and lose focus. This story is inspired by a real-life tragedy. Since the 1960s, a man named Al had a riverfront spot in Orange, Texas, where swimming was common. In June 2015, he spotted a massive predator and banned swimming. On July 3rd, 28-year-old Tommy Woodward ignored the warnings and jumped in despite his girlfriend's fears. He was attacked and dragged under by an 11-foot gator. He became the first fatal victim of an alligator attack in Texas in almost 2 centuries.
This happened during the summer when I was 24 years old. Back then, Betty and I were still together. We traveled to Santa Fe, New Mexico to celebrate our anniversary. We didn't know that trip would be the beginning of the end for us. On the day it happened, we were walking around the Santa Fe Plaza in the historic Old Town. The area was packed with tourists, souvenir shops, and restaurants lined up side by side. After a while, Betty said her stomach was hurting and asked me to go buy some antacids. She told me she would wait right in front of the public restrooms nearby. I headed off, thinking I'd only be gone for a few minutes. But since I didn't know my way around the tourist district, it took me nearly 30 minutes to find a store and get back. When I returned to the spot, Betty was gone. At first, I wasn't too worried. I figured she might have stepped inside the restroom or was just browsing a shop close by. I waited for a few minutes and then called her. The phone rang, but nobody picked up. I called 4 more times with the same result, and that's when the panic started to set in. I walked circles around the plaza, checking every bench, every craft stall, and all the small side streets leading off the square. I kept calling her over and over, but Betty never answered and was nowhere to be found. I was officially terrified. Betty wasn't the type of person to just wander off without saying anything. Even if she were mad at me, she would have at least sent a text. Then, my phone vibrated. It was a very long iMessage from Betty's number. The content left me speechless. She said she was fed up with our relationship and wanted to end things immediately. She told me not to look for her because she had already taken a taxi and left the city. I was shocked, angry, and confused all at once. I couldn't understand how someone who just asked me to buy them medicine could suddenly break up with me in such an abrupt and nonsensical way. I tried calling her back, but the phone was turned off. I texted her asking for an explanation, but there was no reply. Frustrated and hurt, I wandered around the old town looking for a bar to clear my head. That's when I saw something strange in a secluded corner. 2 middle-aged women were dragging a young girl along the sidewalk. The girl looked completely out of it. Her eyes were glazed over, and her limbs were limp as if she had no strength left. To a stranger, it looked like 2 friends helping someone who had too much to drink, but my gut told me something was wrong because of how forced it looked. I stepped forward and asked if they needed help. Immediately, the 2 women jumped, let go of the girl, and muttered something about their friend being too drunk before disappearing into the crowd. Once the girl caught her breath, she told me a horrifying story. She had just stepped out of a restroom when 2 strange women approached her, pretended to be her friends, and started dragging her away. When she tried to cry out for help, they told bystanders she was just drunk. People just watched with pity or annoyance, and no one stepped in to help. Hearing that sent a chill down my spine. I immediately thought of Betty. The coincidence was too terrifying to ignore. I ran straight to a nearby police station to file a report, but the officers were incredibly dismissive. They looked at the breakup text on my phone and shrugged it off as relationship drama, saying she had clearly stated she was leaving. They told me to go back to my hotel and wait. I left the station feeling helpless and searched the plaza for Betty one last time. Finally, exhausted and hopeless, I went back to the hotel. When I opened the door, I was stunned to see Betty there. She was sitting on the floor in a state of total shock. She was covered in scratches and dirt, and her face was deathly pale. After I calmed her down, she finally told me about the kidnapping drama she had just survived in broad daylight. While she was waiting for me, 2 strange women dressed like tourists approached her. They suddenly grabbed her by the hair and started screaming at her. They yelled to the surrounding crowd that Betty was a professional scammer who had just stolen a large sum of money from them. Their aggression and the details of their lies were so convincing that the people passing by believed them. Bystanders looked at Betty with judgment. Some even whispered in agreement with the victims instead of helping her. Just like that, in the middle of a crowded square, Betty was abducted. They took her down into a basement room that Betty described as looking like a private lounge or a karaoke room. There were 2 other girls already trapped in there. A short time later, a man walked in. According to Betty, everything he said made it clear that the 3 of them were part of a human trafficking deal. He said he was waiting for the other side to inspect the merchandise, but he seemed angry because there was some kind of complication. In the end, the deal fell through. After a tense standoff, the kidnappers decided to let all 3 girls go. Before they left, the men made a very clear threat. If anyone went to the police, the consequences would be fatal because they knew how to find them. It was obvious then. The breakup text I received had been sent by the kidnappers. I immediately insisted on going back to the police to show them the location of the basement and take down the gang. But Betty was so traumatized by the threats that she flatly refused. She just wanted to leave Santa Fe immediately and never look back. We had the biggest fight of our lives over this. I felt that staying silent was helping criminals, but she felt I wasn't being sensitive to her safety or the safety of our families. In the end, we drove back to Los Angeles without reporting it. But what happened in Santa Fe didn't stay there. It lingered between us. Betty became more and more withdrawn. I couldn't get over my feelings of helplessness and anger. Eventually, after many more arguments, we broke up. That story is a painful lesson I will never forget. To this day, whenever I travel, I never let my loved ones stand alone for too long.
My name is Emily. 2 years ago, I was 25 and living a stable life in a quiet suburb of Vermont. My life was pretty simple back then, working as an accountant. I used to dream about having a cozy home with a warm-hearted man to share the long winters with. That was the reason I downloaded Tinder and met Daniel. Daniel was 31 at the time and a third-generation manager for a well-known hotel chain. He had everything a woman could want: a solid career, good looks, and a very attentive way about him. Most importantly, just like me, he often talked about his desire to start a family. Because we seemed to want the same things, and he appeared so sincere, I said yes when he proposed after we had dated for over a year. Even then, deep down, I didn't truly feel like I loved him enough. We got engaged and moved in together. That's when the first cracks started to show. Daniel slowly became cold toward me. I even got the feeling that he was intentionally avoiding me. At the time, I told myself it was just work stress. I figured that having some friction when you first move in together was normal. I chose to trust him and tried even harder to change myself to fit into his life. 1 month before the wedding, I officially quit my job. On my last day, my coworkers threw me a small farewell party. I left the office carrying a huge bouquet of flowers, my heart full of hope for this new chapter of my life. As I walked out of the office building, I was still feeling a little buzzed and happy from the party. Suddenly, I bumped into a woman walking toward me. Everything happened so fast. Before I could even look up to apologize, she lunged at me. I only caught a glimpse of the wild, crazed look in her eyes before I felt a sharp, agonizing pain pierce my stomach and my head. I collapsed. The sounds around me became distorted. All I could hear was a ringing in my ears, chaotic screaming, and people calling my name as my coworkers rushed to tackle the woman. In the delirium before I blacked out, I heard her voice screaming hysterically.
You have to disappear. If you're gone, I finally get to be with him.
I woke up in the hospital after 3 days in a coma and 2 life-saving surgeries. But the real death blow came from the police report. The fiancé I had trusted for 2 years had actually been leading a double life. The woman who attacked me was his 29-year-old mistress. They had been together long before I ever entered the picture. Daniel had fed her a sick delusion. He told her I was just a practical choice for his family's business image, but that she was his true love. As our wedding date got closer, her desperation turned into violence. She truly believed that if I no longer existed, Daniel would have no choice but to put her in my place. And just like that, I, an innocent person, became the victim of both my future husband and his mistress. My family was absolutely furious. The engagement was called off immediately. Daniel's family was forced to pay for all my medical bills and the cancellation fees for the wedding. But the audacity didn't stop there. The attacker's parents actually came to the hospital to ask for mediation. They made excuses, saying their daughter was also a victim of betrayal and that she had been driven insane by heartbreak. I refused. Being pitiful is not an excuse for attempted murder. When I stood my ground, they immediately flipped. They started spreading malicious rumors on social media, claiming I was the other woman who used dirty tricks to steal their daughter's boyfriend. The nasty rumors began to spread like wildfire. Fake accounts started making up scenarios where I was always the villain. The hateful comments and messages pushed me to my breaking point. I hired a lawyer, filed reports against the accounts defaming me, and spoke out publicly with the truth of my story. Justice was finally served. The woman was sentenced to prison for attempted murder. Daniel and his family paid the price with a ruined reputation, and their company took a massive hit because of the scandal. But the price I paid was also far too high. I still live in Vermont. 2 years have passed, but the scars on my body and my soul are still there. I don't have the courage to believe in promises anymore, and I can't even bring myself to think about starting a family ever again.
My name is Daniel. I just got back from the police station, closing the chapter on the most horrifying event of my life. But it's only a legal ending. The memories will haunt me for as long as I live. Everything started 4 years ago. After being single for a long time, I downloaded Tinder. Before long, I met a girl named Amber. We hit it off immediately. Amber was smart and shared almost the same taste in everything as me. After only 2 weeks of dating, Amber suddenly suggested that we move in together to take our relationship to the next level. I was shocked by how pushy she was. Even though I liked her, I felt things were moving way too fast. I had a vague, uneasy gut feeling, so I decided to turn her down and end the relationship right then and there. Amber didn't accept it. She lost her mind. For the next month, I was bombarded with desperate texts, missed calls in the middle of the night, and emails of her sobbing and begging me to come back. Her stalking only made me more certain that leaving her was the right choice. Then, suddenly, Amber went completely silent. I figured she had finally found a new target. About a month later, I went to my high school reunion and ran into my ex-girlfriend, Lily. We had broken up on good terms years ago, so reconnecting felt very natural. The mix of familiarity and new sparks made me fall in love with Lily all over again. But the happiness didn't last long. Shortly after I got back together with Lily, the real nightmare began. I started getting texts from an unknown number. The messages were incredibly sick. "You're making a mistake," and "You're going to pay for this." I tried calling back, but the line was always disconnected. Lily started getting the same threatening messages too. She was terrified, crying all the time, and wouldn't leave my side. I began to suspect that Amber was behind it. The texting style was almost identical to the desperate emails she had sent me before. Things escalated until one night. Lily called me in a total state of panic. Her house was engulfed in flames. Luckily, Lily made it out just in time. She told me she thought she heard someone inside earlier, but she was sleepy and ignored it. It was very likely that an intruder had broken in and set the fire. The police investigated, but they couldn't find any evidence or footprints because the security cameras in the area were broken. Right after the fire, I got an anonymous text. "I warned you." At that point, I completely broke down. I felt like a monster for dragging Lily into the crosshairs of a lunatic like Amber. To keep Lily safe, I made the painful decision to break up with her. When I told her we had to end it, Lily was silent and stared at me for a long time. Then, she simply nodded and agreed. No arguing, no begging. After I broke up with Lily, the harassment faded away and eventually stopped altogether. I heard Lily moved on with someone new and settled down. I believed Amber had finally gotten what she wanted and was leaving me alone. I had almost forgotten the whole thing until one morning when the police knocked on my door. They wanted me to help with an investigation into Amber's death. I was stunned to hear she had been dead for a long time. The next piece of information from the police was even more shocking. The killer was Lily. It turned out that after our first breakup years ago, Lily never actually let me go. She had been secretly stalking me for a long time. Seeing me date Amber was the spark that triggered Lily's hidden dark personality. That crazy woman had planned a way to get close to Amber and murdered her right after our very last date. Then, she took Amber's phone and used it to pretend Amber was still alive, sending those terrifying texts to me and even to herself. The house fire started to make sense too. The police couldn't prove it then, but looking back, I realized it was all a calculated plan by Lily to point all my suspicion toward Amber. The plan was so perfect that if Amber's mother hadn't been so persistent about reporting her daughter missing and noticing strange patterns in her daughter's texting style over the years, the truth might have stayed buried forever. Lily was arrested immediately. When I saw the photo of her in handcuffs in the newspaper, I shivered. I realized the woman I wanted to protect, the woman I thought was a victim, was actually a cold-blooded killer who lived with that secret for years just to own me. This story is inspired by a true case. The case of Carrie Farver began in 2012 when she vanished after dating a man named Dave Krupa for 2 weeks. Dave and his ex-girlfriend Shanna received thousands of threats from Carrie's accounts for years. Police originally thought Carrie just ran away, but later discovered Shanna killed Carrie out of jealousy and spent years impersonating the victim to manipulate Dave. Shanna was sentenced to life in prison in 2017, though Carrie's body was never found. I have never told this story to anyone. It is a scar that runs too deep, a secret I have spent my entire adult life trying to bury. I was 19 years old back then. At that age, I was filled with an extreme sense of rebellion. I hated the constraints of my family and wanted to break every rule. That was when I met Peter. Peter wasn't like anyone I had ever known. He lived recklessly, freely, and intensely. With him, I felt like I could truly be myself without being judged or forced to change. So I ran away from home to be with him. We survived by shoplifting from convenience stores and small grocery marts. I learned street skills from Peter. He was also the one who introduced me to drugs. We leaned on each other, just drifting through life like ghosts. Disaster struck when Peter was caught during a theft. He was sentenced to 3 months in a local jail, while I was lucky enough to only be put on probation. During those 3 months, I lived alone, struggling through the agonizing pain of withdrawal and missing him like crazy. I had no idea that while he was locked up, Peter was forced to get completely clean. It was a requirement of the jail, and he was actually sober by the time his release date approached. The day Peter was released, I was so happy I felt like I was losing my mind. I had a gift ready to welcome him back, a $10 bag of heroin. The moment we met outside the jail gates, we threw our arms around each other in pure joy. We hurried into a quiet, secluded alleyway, hidden from everyone's sight. I pulled out the gift. Peter looked at me, and for a split second, I saw a flash of hesitation in his eyes. But in the end, his old addiction and his desire to please me won. We used the drugs together. I had missed that floating sensation and the way the world spins for 3 long months. Eventually, we drifted off into a deep sleep in each other's arms. I don't remember much of what happened next. My memory is a blurred mess of being conscious and being blacked out. The only thing I felt clearly was Peter beside me. I felt completely safe and at peace. At one point, I felt Peter fidgeting as if he wanted to leave or get up. But because I wanted to keep him in my arms, I grabbed his sleeve and pulled him closer, hugging him as tight as I could. When I finally woke up, the sun was starting to come up. A few seconds after I cleared my head, I realized something was wrong. Peter's body in my arms was ice cold, and his skin was a bruised purplish color. I tried to convince myself he was just in a very deep sleep, but when I touched his chest, there was no heartbeat. I froze for a few seconds before total panic set in, and then I scrambled up, screaming his name over and over. No matter how hard I shook him or how loud I yelled, Peter didn't wake up. Then, terror hit me as I realized I was sitting next to a corpse. In a moment of total panic, I did the most cowardly thing of my life. I ran. I bolted out of that alley, leaving his body lying there among the trash. Later that afternoon, I overheard some homeless people talking about a man's body found in the alley. The police concluded it was a typical overdose death of a wandering addict. There was no big investigation, and no one came looking for me. Given Peter's situation, I knew they just saw it as another typical death of a young addict and didn't look into it further. Even though I wasn't prosecuted, the haunting in my mind is 1,000 times worse than jail. I realized that when Peter was fidgeting that night, he wasn't trying to leave me. He was reaching out for help. He was desperately searching for a way to survive while I, blinded by my own selfishness and the drugs, held him tight, accidentally choking off his last chance at life. I had slept soundly on top of the cooling body of the person I loved most.
My name is Rachel. 15 years ago, after going through 2 unhappy marriages and having no children of my own, I adopted a baby boy named Joe. I was always so proud of him. I felt lucky to raise such a good kid. He was thoughtful, did well in school, and was remarkably handsome. Since I didn't have a partner, I had to work extra hard to provide for the 2 of us. I worked 2 jobs at the same time. I always tried to organize my life perfectly so I could still spend plenty of quality time with Joe. I used to think I understood him completely, but I was wrong. Because of his personality and his looks, Joe had a lot of girls interested in him by his sophomore year of high school. He was very open about his dating life and shared stories with me often. I was very easygoing about it and happy that he felt comfortable telling me everything. Eventually, Joe started asking to bring girls over to the house. Sometimes, these girls would ask to sleep over, claiming they were studying late or that their parents couldn't pick them up. I agreed to let them stay. Because of my second job, I usually got home late, so I didn't interfere much. I just reminded the kids to behave responsibly. However, after about a semester, I started to feel uneasy. The number of girls Joe brought home kept increasing. I realized I almost never saw the same girl a second time. At the time, I just assumed he was a typical teenager who caught feelings fast and lost interest even faster. One morning on my way to work, I happened to see a missing person flyer taped to a utility pole near a store. The face of the girl on the flyer made me stop in my tracks. She looked incredibly familiar. If I wasn't mistaken, she was one of Joe's former girlfriends. I planned to ask him about it when I got home, but I ended up forgetting. Over the next few days, more flyers appeared. All the girls were around Joe's age, and they were wearing the familiar uniforms of the high school he attended. I asked Joe about it. I was curious because he usually talked a lot about school, but he hadn't mentioned this at all. Joe just gave a cold smile and said he didn't like sharing sad news. He asked me to stop bringing it up. I thought a lot about his attitude and that specific comment. My mother's intuition told me something was very wrong, and I decided to keep a closer eye on my son. I secretly changed my work schedule. I started coming home 2 hours early from each job, making the excuse that I was tired and needed more rest. In reality, I was quietly observing Joe, and a mother's gut feeling is never wrong. Joe started going out late at night, claiming he was taking a walk or meeting a friend. He kept his phone with him at all times and changed his password constantly. Some nights, he would come home very late and immediately start a load of laundry in the middle of the night. One day when Joe wasn't home, I snuck into his room to check around. The room was clean and organized, just like always. But while looking through his notebooks and papers, I found a stack of papers hidden deep under a pile of documents. When I pulled them out, I was horrified. They were all the missing person flyers for the high school girls who had disappeared over the past few months. On each flyer, there were handwritten notes. They were judgmental comments like, "Too noisy," "Can't keep a secret," or "Too demanding." The handwriting undeniably belonged to my son. What I read next in Joe's diary was truly nightmare-inducing. Entry 1. She was noisier than I thought. The screaming was so annoying. Entry 2. Getting better. Being more forceful is definitely the best method. Entry 3. Perfect. Keep doing it this way. All of these notes, combined with the strange behavior I had seen over the past few days, led me to one single terrifying conclusion. Joe was the killer. I stood there frozen for a long time. I asked myself if this was really the sweet boy I had raised for 15 years. It has been almost a week since I read those words. I am constantly in a state of panic and fear. I have thought about calling the police, but if my suspicions are true, I don't know how I could face the reality of it. Then I try to tell myself it's all a big misunderstanding and that I'm just overthinking things. I can't act natural around Joe anymore. The more I look at his familiar face, the more like a stranger he becomes. During dinner tonight, Joe suddenly looked directly at me. His gaze made me shiver. He stared deep into my eyes as if he were searching for something. Then Joe gave a slight smile and asked, "You've been acting different lately, Mom." It's almost like you found out a secret, isn't it? My name is Doyle. When I was 10 years old, I had a very strange hobby. I loved wandering through the woods to find animal bones and bring them home to keep as treasures. My family lived in a neighborhood right on the edge of the forest. Behind our neighbor's house, there was a trail that led deep into the old-growth woods. Every kid in the area was strictly forbidden from going back there, but because of my obsession, I always found a way to sneak past the rules. I usually slipped away when my parents weren't paying attention. Once I successfully escaped into the woods, I would jump for joy and start my search. I could spend hours, or even a whole afternoon, with my head down, eyes scanning the ground, and hands constantly digging through the dirt. One afternoon, I prepared to head into the forest as usual. From the moment I stepped past the tree line behind the neighbor's house, I had an uneasy feeling I couldn't explain. But it was a perfect opportunity because my parents were going to be home late. Plus, my collection was almost complete, so I decided to push forward. The forest was incredibly quiet that day. There was no sun, so the scenery looked very gloomy. I thought about turning back, but then a small glint of light suddenly appeared between the trees. I was curious because I had never seen it before, and I subconsciously started to follow it. I went deep inside, deeper than I had ever gone before, until the light vanished. In front of me stood an old wooden cabin I had never seen. The roof was rotting, the windows were dark like empty eye sockets, and vines covered the walls. It looked exactly like a witch's house from the cartoons I used to watch. I felt a chill, but I was also excited, so I moved closer. Right next to the porch, I was drawn to a bunch of bones scattered on the ground. I assumed they were animal bones, so I knelt down to examine them. However, I quickly realized that some of the bones had unusual shapes. They were also quite large compared to the types I usually collected. I kept looking, thinking I might find a perfect piece to add to my collection. As I stepped forward, I saw a skull resting in a pile of decaying leaves. The black, hollow eye sockets were staring right at me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. But for a kid with such a weird hobby, I was pretty brave. I leaned in even closer to get a look, using my hand to brush away some leaves so I could see it clearly. When the skull was fully exposed, I saw that the jaw didn't look like any animal I owned, like a dog or a fox. And then, my heart hammered so hard it felt like it would explode out of my chest when I realized it was a human skull. I screamed and ran for my life. I crashed through thorn bushes, not daring to look back. Just as I was about to make it out of the woods, I suddenly saw a man standing right in the middle of the trail. He was very tall and thin, wearing a heavy coat even though the weather wasn't cold at all. What terrified me the most was his unblinking stare and a subtle, knowing smirk. I stopped a few yards away from him. Suddenly, he tilted his head, looked at me, and asked in a very low voice, "Did you find any bones?" That question made me freeze for a few seconds. I was stunned that he knew what I had been doing. I didn't answer. I just closed my eyes and bolted past him, heading straight for home. When I saw my parents, I immediately burst into tears and told them everything. After I described the location of the cabin, my father's expression completely changed. For the first time, I heard my parents talk about something the adults in the neighborhood had always kept secret from the children. 5 years earlier, a boy my age had gone missing after walking into those woods alone. The police searched for nearly a year, but found nothing. After the incident, the boy's parents were so heartbroken that they moved away. The case had remained a mystery ever since. The police immediately cordoned off the forest for almost a week. My parents absolutely refused to tell me what they found inside that cabin. But from that day on, the trail behind the neighbor's house was fenced off, and I was permanently banned from going near those woods again. Whenever I remember it, the fear returns. I don't want to confirm the truth. But what makes me wake up gasping in the middle of the night is the memory of that man on the trail. That unblinking stare and the question about the bones. Was he the killer? And if he was, why was he still there after all those years?
My name is Chris, and this is a story about something I saw with my own eyes 5 years ago. To this day, I still don't have the courage to open the photos I took that night. It was a solo camping trip over the weekend. I chose a remote forest located about a 2-hour drive from the nearest town. As I drove deeper into the woods, my cell phone signal disappeared completely. After setting up my tent by a creek, I grabbed my camera. I decided to hike deeper into the forest to catch some landscape shots at sunset. While following a strange, moss-covered trail, I suddenly spotted flickering lights in the distance. As I got closer, I discovered an old church sitting isolated in a large clearing. In front of the church, hundreds of people dressed in white were gathered in total silence around a tree. At first, I was just curious. I figured it was some kind of strange local religious ceremony, so I hid behind a large trunk to watch. But very quickly, my curiosity turned into pure horror. A thin man, with his hands and feet tightly bound, was kneeling at the base of the tree. A rope was looped around his neck and tossed over a high branch. Three well-dressed men, who looked very different from the rest of the crowd, stepped forward. They began to pull the rope that hung over the branch. The man was instantly yanked upward, his feet dangling and kicking in midair. The surrounding crowd began to sing in unison. The man struggled violently and tried to scream for help, but the singing drowned him out. I felt like my legs were going to give out. I was all alone, and I knew I would be in grave danger if I confronted that many people. With no cell service, I couldn't call anyone for help. After only a few minutes, the man stopped moving completely. As soon as his limp body was lowered to the ground, the crowd began to cheer joyfully, as if they had just finished a sacred ritual. In total shock, I raised my camera and snapped a few photos for evidence. Then, I scrambled away in a daze. While trying to find my way back to camp, I accidentally circled around to the back of the church. I stumbled upon a field filled with wooden crosses packed tightly together. Many of the mounds of dirt were fresh and bright red, looking as if they had just been filled. At the edge of the field, I saw a child, about 10 years old, tied to a tree. I rushed over to untie the boy, but his reaction sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't scared, and he wasn't happy to see me. He looked at me with eyes that were completely hollow and soulless. When I urged him to run with me, he just shook his head. He spoke as calmly as if he were talking about a field trip. "I can't go yet. It's almost my turn. After the wedding day, we will all get to see God." I shuddered as I realized this child had been completely brainwashed. The wedding day ritual he mentioned was the horrific strangling I had just witnessed. As I tried to convince him one more time, a shout rang out behind me. Two tall men in dark coats emerged from the shadows. They pointed directly at me and screamed. I tried to pull the boy with me to run, but he broke free and refused to follow. I had no choice. I had to run to save my own life. It was a true fight for survival. I tore through thorn bushes, feeling the sharp branches rip into my skin. The number of men in black chasing me grew. In my panic, I slipped and tumbled down a small slope, hitting a rock hard. I could barely stand up. However, the slope hid me from view, and the forest was thick and dark. I lay perfectly still as the men ran right past me without noticing. I had accidentally found the perfect hiding spot. Once I was sure they were gone, I crawled out and ran toward the main road near town before dawn. I immediately took all my photos and my story to the local police station. I thought I had uncovered a mass kidnapping and murder site, and I expected a large-scale rescue mission. But their reaction was confusing. They glanced at the photos, exchanged a knowing look with each other, and simply said they would send someone to check it out. A few days later, I was told that the leader of the group had been arrested, but was quickly released due to insufficient evidence. I tried to explain about the strangled man and the tied-up child, but the police claimed it could have been a voluntary religious ritual. They said my photos weren't clear enough to prove anything. I was stunned and felt completely helpless against their ridiculous excuses and lazy investigation. A few days later, while I was still reeling from the shock, I received an anonymous text. "Stop digging if you want to stay safe." That was when I understood. The leader's release wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. It gave him time to go back and scrub the evidence now that I had exposed the location. Perhaps those well-dressed men pulling the rope had much deeper connections than just some forest cult. For the past 5 years, I have been haunted by that child's hollow eyes. I watched a crime happen right in front of me, but in the end, I couldn't save anyone.
I might have even accidentally helped the killers cover their tracks. I still have those photos on an old hard drive, but I have never dared to look at them again. The story is inspired by a real-life case. The Shakahola cult, led by Paul Mackenzie, is considered one of Kenya's most horrific tragedies. Initially, Mackenzie lured hundreds of followers with staged miracle cures, then brainwashed them into believing the apocalypse was coming and that modern society was a tool of evil. He forced followers to sell all their possessions and move to an isolated 800-acre forest. There, Mackenzie ordered followers to starve to death to meet God, with children dying first. When many no longer wanted to die, he created a wedding day ritual where guards directly strangled or beat victims to death amidst the cheers of the crowd. By 2024, authorities had unearthed more than 450 bodies, many victims showing signs of organ harvesting. Mackenzie and dozens of accomplices are currently being prosecuted for murder, terrorism, and child torture.
I accidentally saved the monster on a snowy night. I have lived alone in a log cabin deep in the woods of Montana for nearly 15 years. It was the most violent blizzard I had seen in all my years in the forest. In the middle of the night, while I was reinforcing the cabin door, I heard a frantic knocking and the sound of someone moaning. When I opened the door, I was shocked to see a young man in terrible shape, nearly frozen to death. He was shaking uncontrollably in tattered clothes, and his face was as white as a sheet. He kept whispering, begging me to let him stay for just one night. Seeing him like that, I couldn't turn him away. I threw more wood into the fireplace, grabbed a blanket, and made him a hot pot of tea. After he calmed down a bit, he thanked me, though his voice was still trembling. It was clear he had been through something absolutely horrific. I checked on him and learned his name was Philip. He said he had been on a hiking trip with his girlfriend, Mia, to propose to her. Hearing this made me suspicious. This time of year was a terrible time for a long hike. Philip started telling his story through choked sobs, claiming they were attacked by wild animals. He said he had to watch Mia being torn apart right in front of his eyes, unable to do anything to help. He sat huddled by the fire, muttering about the gruesome scene like someone on the verge of a mental breakdown. I tried to comfort Philip and asked for the exact location of the attack. I know this terrain like the back of my hand and trust my survival skills. I thought maybe there was still hope for Mia, or at least I could bring back whatever was left of her. But Philip didn't answer. He just kept crying and calling out his girlfriend's name. I figured he was too traumatized to talk, so I stopped pushing and went to cook him a bowl of soup. As I brought the soup out, the storm outside reached its peak. The wind was so strong that falling branches slammed against the cabin's tin roof with a loud roar. I quickly went around the house to make sure everything was secure, but when I walked back into the living room, the atmosphere had turned bone-chilling. Philip wasn't crying anymore. He wasn't shaking or huddling either. He was sitting straight up in the chair with an eerily calm expression, his sharp eyes staring directly at me. A remote location, extreme weather, plus the hungry animals out there, Philip repeated slowly, looking out the window. There was something in his tone that made my blood run cold. Then, Philip gave a slight smile. It's the perfect way to make sure nobody ever finds anything. I froze. The bowl of soup in my hand nearly slipped to the floor. Philip looked up at me, and his eyes were now the eyes of a predator enjoying his prize. Philip began to speak in a flat, calm voice about how he had lured Mia into an area with animal tracks. He described watching her panic and run into the blizzard, and how the forest quickly swallowed her screams. He wasn't a victim. He was a killer who was proud of his crime. He burst into a delighted laugh that echoed throughout the cabin. In that moment, I realized I had invited a demon into my home. I stayed as calm as I could,
trying not to draw his attention as I backed up toward the wall near the dining table. My hunting shotgun was hanging right there, but Philip was faster than I expected. The moment my hand touched the gun, he pulled a folding knife from his jacket and lunged at me like a rabid animal. Everything happened in a flash. We wrestled in the middle of the cramped cabin. I realized he was much stronger than he looked, and every strike he threw was aimed to kill. The sharp blade kept grazing my face.
I managed to point the barrel at him, but in a split second of hesitation because I didn't want to become a killer myself, Philip lunged and knocked the gun aside. Immediately after, he buried the blade deep into my shoulder. Philip laughed with excitement when he heard me scream in pain. His overconfidence gave me one last chance. I pushed through the pain, used every bit of my strength to kick him hard in the stomach, and scrambled for the gun. Philip lunged again, but this time, I was faster. As soon as I grabbed the shotgun, I aimed at his legs and pulled the trigger repeatedly. But instead of screaming in agony, he just looked down at his wounds and started laughing like a complete madman. I quickly tied him up and secured him to the window bars. Since there was no cell service to call the police, I had to guard this wild animal all through the night and until the next afternoon. The ordeal ended when I handed Philip over to the police and gave them all the information about the girl named Mia. According to what I learned later, the police found traces of the crime. Mia was real, but all that remained of the poor girl were 2 fingers and a single shoe buried in the snow. She had been consumed by wild animals, exactly as his cruel plan intended. Ever since that night with Philip, if a man knocks on my door, I refuse to open it. I thought I had lived in the woods long enough to know what was dangerous, until I opened the door and let Philip inside.
The scariest person isn't the one who goes crazy. It's the one who stays perfectly calm after destroying someone. My sister used to be a very gentle person before her boyfriend cheated on her 5 years ago. Since then, she became obsessed with a girl named Anna, the woman she blamed for ruining her relationship. After the breakup, my sister spiraled into a cycle of pure hatred. She constantly stalked Anna's social media, drove past her house for hours, and kept detailed notes on Anna's daily schedule and everyone she met. We shared a room back then. Some nights, I'd wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and see her sitting in the dark, staring at Anna's photos. Even creepier, she used a photo of Anna and her ex-boyfriend as her computer wallpaper. I told my parents I was worried about her mental state. However, they just thought she was going through a rough patch after a breakup and didn't want to upset her further. But I knew better. I could always see something dark and distorted in the way she looked at things. Then one day, it all stopped. Anna moved to a distant state to start a new life. From that moment on, my sister became unusually calm. She stopped mentioning Anna's name, deleted all the photos, started doing yoga, and went to work every day like nothing had ever happened. My parents were relieved, thinking she had finally moved on. Last month, I agreed to stay at her apartment to watch her cat while she was away on a 2-day business trip. That night, while I was sleeping in her room, I noticed her pillow felt strange. It had a weird seam running right through the middle that was uncomfortable to lay on. It also felt unusually heavy and had something hard inside. Curious, I pulled out the stuffing and found a small notebook hidden deep inside the pillow. It definitely belonged to my sister. I recognized her handwriting immediately, but the content wasn't sad diary entries. Instead, it was dozens of pages of detailed notes on pharmacology. She had written about acute allergic reactions and cases of food-induced anaphylactic shock.
There were even sections analyzing how certain substances could trigger a deadly reaction, but break down quickly in the body, making it easy for an autopsy to conclude the death was an accident or natural causes. Some pages noted the onset times, symptoms, and the probability of avoiding detection in blood tests. I was shocked because my sister works in PR. She has absolutely nothing to do with the medical field. I flipped to the very last page. There was nothing but a set of GPS coordinates written in red ink, followed by the words, "Since karma won't punish her, I'll do it myself." A feeling of dread washed over me. I immediately looked up those coordinates online. They led to a small town in the exact state where Anna had moved. When I searched for Anna's social media again, my heart sank. I discovered she had passed away a few months ago from a severe allergic reaction after eating shrimp. It was ruled a tragic accident. Anna's final post was a photo of her standing in front of a flower shop. She was smiling happily with her new boyfriend. I panicked and told my parents everything. I showed them the evidence and the terrifying coincidences, but they just went cold on me. My parents screamed at me, calling me delusional and a bad sibling for trying to frame my sister. My dad was even furious that I had violated her privacy. To make matters worse, my mother accidentally let it slip to my sister right after. When my sister returned from her trip, I rushed to her apartment to confront her. As soon as I reached the door, the smell of burnt paper hit my nose. I ran inside and found her standing in the kitchen next to the sink, which was filled with the ashes of a half-burned notebook. She had destroyed the diary. She wasn't angry or out of control like I expected. She just looked at me with cold, dead eyes and told me I should learn to respect other people's privacy. After that day, she completely cut off all contact with me. In the time since then, my sister's life has seemed wonderful. She posts photos of herself traveling, dining out, and hanging out with friends. People leave comments about how beautiful she looks now that she has let go and moved on. Then one day, I froze when I saw her latest photo. In the picture, she was standing right in front of the same flower shop from Anna's final post. Her expression and her calm smile made me shiver. I realized I am living with a horrific secret. I know my sister killed someone, but I have no legal evidence. My parents act as a shield between her and any suspicion, as if they are more afraid of the truth than anything else in the world. The other day, I accidentally heard that her ex-boyfriend is getting married soon. That evening, when I stopped by my parents' house, I saw my sister sitting alone at the dining table. In front of her was a brand new notebook. She was slowly writing something on the white pages, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. I have never dared to tell this story to anyone. The truth about Nicole isn't just a scary memory. It is a life sentence for my conscience. I met Nicole when I was 20 years old. She was beautiful, charming, and came from a very wealthy family. Even though she had many admirers, she turned them all down. We quickly started a relationship, and I felt like the luckiest guy in the world. I thought I would be the one worrying about protecting my girlfriend from other guys, but the reality was the exact opposite. I couldn't have imagined how jealous Nicole would be, especially since there was no one else in my life. At first, I thought her jealousy and her need to be with me every second was just because she loved me too much. But before long, Nicole started showing signs that made me feel very uneasy. During one of our dates, I accidentally bumped into a waitress at a restaurant. Nicole looked annoyed immediately. Then when she saw me apologize to the waitress, she completely lost her mind. She screamed at the waitress to stop. Then she suddenly smashed a glass, cut her own hand, and forced the woman to kneel down and apologize to me. After she got what she wanted, she cried because of the pain, but she was also laughing. She told me that no one was allowed to hurt me. That was the first time I felt a shiver down my spine. I was terrified looking into her eyes. She became more and more extreme as time went on. She controlled all of my friendships and called me dozens of times every night. She would show up at my job and go into a rage if I didn't answer her texts immediately. I didn't feel any love in the relationship anymore, so I asked to break up. I never expected what happened next. Nicole brought a can of gasoline to my front door and threatened to set herself on fire if I didn't take back what I said. She cried and screamed in the middle of the street. She said that if I left her, she would die right in front of me. I was so scared and embarrassed that I gave in. Just a second later, Nicole was happy again. She ran to hug and kiss me as if nothing had ever happened. Meanwhile, I was truly panicked and feared for my own safety. After that breakup attempt, Nicole's control over me reached a breaking point. She started following me everywhere. Many times I saw her car parked near my office, and she would stay there all day until I finished work. Other times, the car would appear across the street from my apartment, even in the middle of the night. One morning, I opened my door and found a dead bird hanging on my porch. There was a note that said, "If you leave me, this will be your fate." I couldn't take it anymore, so I went to the police. I told them I was being stalked and harassed, but Nicole denied everything. Her wealthy family immediately stepped in, hired expensive lawyers, and made the whole problem disappear. I tried to cut off all contact, but Nicole kept sabotaging my life. She even called the police and lied, saying that I was the one abusing her. Every time this happened, her family would show up to protect her from any consequences. Driven into a corner, I was forced to quit my job and move in the middle of the night. I changed my phone number and left everything behind just to escape her. But just as I was settling into my new life, I felt like I fell into an abyss again. I saw Nicole standing in the parking lot near my new home. She had hired a private investigator to hunt me down. At that moment, I felt like I was going insane. Every noise outside my door made me jump because I thought she was back. I realized that if I kept running or giving in, Nicole would never let me go. I decided to face her directly. I hoped that if I was cold and blunt, she would get bored and leave me alone. I sent her a text demanding that she stop and emphasizing that we were over. Less than an hour later, Nicole showed up at my door with a can of gasoline. She started crying and threatening me again, but this time I wasn't afraid. I coldly told her the truth about her crazy personality, her sick control, and her twisted version of love. I told her clearly that I hadn't loved her for a long time and told her to stop ruining my life. While I was speaking, Nicole frantically poured gasoline all over her body. "I'm sick of your threats. Just stop and leave me alone," I said. Nicole went silent. She looked at me with a hollow, soulless stare that I will never forget. And then, without any warning, she flicked a lighter. The fire exploded across her gasoline-soaked body. I stood frozen for the first few seconds because I couldn't believe my eyes. She actually did it. Her screams of agony ripped through the air and snapped me out of my shock. I rushed toward her, taking off my jacket and trying everything to put out the flames, but it was completely useless. The smell of smoke, the sound of skin blistering, and Nicole's screams have never left my head. Nicole suffered burns over her entire body and died that same night. I went through a long, stressful legal battle with her wealthy family, but I had plenty of evidence to prove how she had destroyed my life with her madness. Eventually, the legal stuff ended, but I was left with a horrific haunting. I escaped Nicole physically,
but her spirit has taken root in my life. I haven't been able to love anyone else, and I haven't had a full night of sleep since. Every time I close my eyes, I see those flames. I see her eyes in that final moment, and I hear her screaming in the dark. My husband and I had just gotten married, and we recently moved into a new apartment on the outskirts of town. One day, I left work early because I felt exhausted and miserable due to my period. I just wanted to lie down and rest. As soon as I walked through the door, I caught a faint, sharp chemical scent in the air. I walked around the house to check things out, but I didn't see anything unusual. I tucked myself in, figuring it was just the smell of fresh paint or some leftover cleaning supplies from the recent renovations. I grabbed a quick snack and headed to bed for an early night. While I was drifting in and out of sleep, a terrifying sensation took over. My throat felt like an invisible hand was squeezing it shut. My chest began to burn, and my lungs felt like they were on fire, making it impossible to breathe in any oxygen. A prickly feeling spread across my skin, quickly turning into an intense itch and a searing heat, as if someone had poured boiling water over me. I wanted to scream for help, but my throat was so swollen that I couldn't make a sound. My heart raced uncontrollably before I finally lost consciousness and everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My husband told me I had been in a deep coma for nearly 17 hours. My entire body felt heavy and every muscle ached. When I reached up to touch my face, I was horrified to find that it was so swollen and distorted that I wouldn't have recognized myself in a mirror. The doctor confirmed that I had suffered a massive bout of anaphylactic shock from a severe allergic reaction. He told me that if I had arrived just a few minutes later, I would have died. I have a life-threatening peanut allergy, and my husband is the only person who knows. He usually checks my food very carefully, so I immediately suspected he might have made the mistake this time. But then I thought about it. If I had eaten peanuts, the reaction would have happened instantly. Instead, this flare-up happened hours later, right after I lay down in bed. I told my husband to check the security cameras in our bedroom. When we watched the footage, I was stunned. My mother-in-law had shown up while we were both at work. She was wearing a face mask and was bundled up like an intruder, using her own spare key to sneak inside. She pulled back the sheets on our bed. Then she pulled out a bag of fine powder and carefully sprinkled it all over the mattress. Finally, she smoothed the sheets back down to make it look like nothing had happened. I realized that powder was the cause. I had been breathing it in for hours while I slept, leading to the severe reaction. I was furious, but I had to stay calm because I was still in so much pain. I demanded that my husband call his mother to confront her right then and there from the hospital. My mother-in-law answered immediately and sounded completely calm. She casually admitted to entering the apartment, claiming she just wanted to help us clean. She insisted the powder was just cornstarch for moisture because she thought the mattress smelled musty. She denied using peanuts and even scolded me for overthinking things. Even though she saw how sick I was, she didn't offer a single word of sympathy. Seeing her cold attitude made me burst into tears as I remembered all the mistreatment I had endured from her. From the very beginning of my relationship with my husband, she always made it clear she didn't like me. She constantly judged my clothes and my cooking, and she dropped hints that I wasn't good enough for her son. Even at our wedding, she went out of her way to embarrass me in front of our relatives with sarcastic comments. I thought moving into our own place would get me away from her control. I never imagined her hatred for me was so deep that she would try to hurt me like this. I couldn't take it anymore, especially since my life had been in danger. I wanted to call the police, but my husband immediately shot the idea down. He claimed his mother just made a mistake. He even demanded that I apologize for doubting her kindness. In that moment, I realized the man I loved, the one I was willing to sacrifice everything for, would never stand up for me. He was a total mama's boy. I asked for a divorce right there in the hospital room and kicked him out. I reached out to my aunt, who was a lawyer, to handle the case. She managed to find a receipt showing my ex-mother-in-law had purchased 4 pounds of pure peanut flour from an organic shop 12 miles away. The timestamp on the receipt was just hours before I ended up in the ER. With clear evidence of attempted murder, she was sentenced to prison and ordered to undergo psychiatric treatment. However, she only served a little over a year before being granted early parole. On the day she was released, she sent a message through her lawyer saying she wanted to meet me in person to apologize. I found it pathetic and refused immediately. I have zero respect for her and never want to see her face again. Now, I've moved to a different state far away, changed all my contact information, and started a new life. But I still can't let go of the trauma. I live in constant fear that one day she will find me and try to finish what she started. My name is Marcus. After the terrifying event I'm about to tell you, I often joke with my wife about why our son looks exactly like her and nothing like me. That simple lack of resemblance almost cost our family everything. A few months ago, my wife and I took our 5-month-old son to Walmart to pick up some household supplies. After we finished shopping, I decided to take our son outside to wait so he wouldn't have to deal with the crowds. My wife stayed behind to pay and planned to push the cart out a few minutes later. I walked with my son to the parking lot in front of the store. He was sleeping peacefully in his infant car seat carrier. I set the carrier down on the ground and stood right next to it, checking my phone while keeping a close eye on him. The parking lot was busy that day. People were constantly walking by, so I didn't think much of a woman who was slowly approaching us. By the time I realized she was a threat, she was already standing right next to me. She looked to be in her late 40s. Her hair was a mess, and she was wearing a heavy winter coat despite the hot weather. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she kept staring intensely at the baby carrier. At first, she just stood there smiling at my son. I figured she was just someone who liked babies, so I didn't pay her much attention. But a second later, she suddenly lunged forward, grabbed the handle of the carrier, and tried to jerk it away. I was shocked. I dropped my phone and grabbed the carrier to hold it back, shouting at her to ask what she was doing. Suddenly, the woman started screaming at the top of her lungs. She pointed right at me and yelled that I was a kidnapper. "Help me! Kidnapper! He's trying to steal my baby!" Before I could even process what was happening, she pulled out a canister of pepper spray and sprayed it directly into my face. The burning pain was instant. I collapsed onto the concrete, barely able to open my eyes. I shouted a few curses at her, but I refused to let go of the handle. We struggled violently, and I could hear my son starting to scream. Hearing his cries triggered my fatherly instincts. I refused to loosen my grip. I pulled with all my might, eventually pulling the carrier onto my lap to shield him. The crazy woman kept screaming for help, telling everyone I was trying to rob her of her child. A crowd quickly gathered, drawn by her screams. Then, the most ridiculous thing happened. The crowd didn't attack her. They attacked me. A man rushed over and punched me hard in the face. I heard a loud crack and felt a sharp, agonizing pain in my nose. Other people grabbed my arms and pinned me down against the pavement. I tried to scream through the pain. "Please, listen to me. I'm his father. She's the kidnapper." The women in the crowd swarmed around her, comforting her
and helping her pick up the carrier as if she had just performed a heroic rescue. A feeling of total helplessness washed over me. I lay there, pinned to the ground, watching my son being carried away by a stranger while I could do absolutely nothing. Right then, my wife appeared. Hearing the commotion, she abandoned her shopping cart and ran full speed into the parking lot. At first, seeing me on the ground surrounded by people, she panicked. She thought I was being mugged and begged the crowd to just take my wallet and leave me alone. A man explained that they were holding me because I had just tried to kidnap that woman's baby. My wife obviously knew that was impossible. She looked confused for a split second before it clicked. She looked around for our son and saw the crazy woman carrying the baby carrier halfway across the parking lot. Without hesitating, she charged at the woman like a mother lion. She grabbed the carrier and screamed, "Let go of my baby, you psycho!" My wife fought her fiercely. She even used her free hand to grab the woman by the throat, refusing to let go until the woman finally dropped the carrier. The crowd began to hesitate when they saw a second woman claiming to be the mother. My wife pulled out her phone and showed everyone her lock screen, which featured a photo of our whole family. Seeing that the situation had turned against her, the strange woman suddenly bolted and ran away. Not a single person tried to stop her. When the police arrived, I was still in temporary handcuffs. After looking at the three of us, one officer remarked that the baby didn't have a single feature that looked like me. Another officer even sarcastically asked how a woman could possibly steal something from a big muscular guy like me. I was so angry at their biased and unprofessional attitude that I snapped back at them. To make things even more frustrating, several witnesses still insisted they saw me attack a woman who was protecting her child. I understand people are protective of children, but I wish they had been a bit smarter. What mother saves her child only to dump the baby and run away? It took nearly an hour of checking security cameras and our IDs before the police officially confirmed the baby was mine. They said it was a chaotic situation and people were just acting with good intentions. I understood, so even though I had a broken nose, a torn lip, and eye damage from the spray, I decided not to sue the people who hit me. About a month later, the police called us with an update. They had identified the woman. She had been seen hanging around shopping centers before and had a history of severe mental illness after losing her only child years ago. They found no evidence she was part of a human trafficking ring, so she was simply committed to a psychiatric hospital. Our family is slowly getting back to normal, but for me, my son's safety has become my absolute top priority. I know I've become overprotective, but the feeling of helplessness I felt watching him be taken is a memory that haunts me. If my wife had come out just a few minutes later, I might have lost my son right in front of my eyes because no one believed I was his father.
My name is Pamela. When I was 8 years old, my family moved to a remote rural area right after school let out for summer break. At first, I wasn't happy about the move at all, but our new house had a massive backyard, and to my 8-year-old eyes, it looked just like a fairy tale forest. Slowly, I began to love the place. My parents were usually busy with their work, so I spent most of my time freely exploring my own little kingdom. During one of my adventures near the edge of the yard, I discovered an old chain-link fence covered in thick vines. Standing there, I could see a small dirt path on the other side. That was where I happened to meet a girl around my age named Alida. I had been feeling pretty lonely since the move because I didn't have any friends nearby, so meeting Alida felt like a radio finally hitting the right frequency. We became best friends fast, even though we could only see each other through the holes in the metal fence. We talked about everything under the sun and shared our favorite toys. I would slide small toys through the gaps for her to play with, and Alida would give me small packets of chocolate.
It was the best chocolate I had ever tasted in my life. I met Alita in secret every day while my parents were busy. I never told them about her. In the world of an 8-year-old, Alita was a precious secret I wanted to keep all to myself. I always timed it perfectly so I could run back to the house before my parents called me, maintaining a double life that felt very dramatic for weeks. One day, I went to the fence to meet Alita like usual, but she didn't show up. I waited a long time until it started to get dark. Just as I was about to head back so I wouldn't get caught, a strange woman appeared and called out to me. She had pale skin covered in weird, splotchy dark spots, and her eyes were deep and sunken, darting around as if she were looking for something. She told me she was Alita's mother and said Alita was very sick today and couldn't come out to play. She asked if I wanted to come visit Alita. Of course I wanted to, but it was almost time for me to go inside, and I knew my parents would be angry if I was late. Seeing me hesitate, the woman pulled out a packet of chocolate, the exact same kind Alita always gave me, and said Alita really wanted to see me. She hasn't eaten anything all day. She said she missed you so much and saved this chocolate to share with you, the woman said. Hearing that, my eyes filled with tears because I was so touched. I begged her to let me see Alita. The woman smiled. She said crawling under the fence would be the fastest way and told me to come closer so she could show me how. I stepped closer to the fence and noticed a section of the wire behind an old oak tree that had been cut open, creating a gap just big enough for me to squeeze through. I looked back at my house. Everything was quiet. I thought to myself that I would only go for a minute and then come right back. But as soon as I leaned down to head toward the hole, the woman lunged forward like a predator. She grabbed my wrist with terrifying strength and started pulling me toward the other side. The force of the jerk made my shoulder pop with a loud crack. I screamed in pain and panic, instinctively trying to pull back. But the woman only squeezed harder, dragging me toward her. Her sharp fingernails dug into my skin as I struggled to break free. I couldn't fight her off. She kept pulling until I was almost all the way through the fence. Suddenly, I heard my dad's voice roar, demanding she let me go. A second later, he appeared out of nowhere, lunging forward and kicking the woman right through the fence. The force knocked her back, and my dad yanked me behind him, standing there like a solid wall. The woman scrambled to her feet and immediately bolted into the dark woods. My dad tried to tear through the broken fence to chase her, but she had already vanished. My mom arrived a moment later. I was so terrified I could only wrap my arms around her and sob. My dad called the police right away, but they couldn't find any information about the woman or a little girl named Alita. I was so scared and didn't understand what had just happened. I just couldn't stop crying. For years after that, I lived under the strict protection of my parents. The fence was reinforced, and my fairy tale garden became a forbidden zone. Alita never appeared again. Now that I'm an adult, I truly understand the horrific dark hole I almost fell into. If my dad hadn't shown up at that exact second, I probably would have been dragged over that fence, taken somewhere, and never seen again. As for Alita, my memories of her have faded. I can't clearly remember her face anymore, and I'm not even sure if she was ever real. Or, even worse, maybe Alita was once a child just like me, one who wasn't lucky enough to be rescued in time and never made it back.
Have you ever thought that just by stepping out of your safe, lighted zone, something much more dangerous than you can imagine might be waiting in the darkness? This story happened to me a few weeks ago, and I still haven't moved past it. I live in an area that is considered extremely safe. I share a room with a friend, so to keep my privacy and avoid bothering him, I have a routine. Every night, I walk out to the open field behind the local high school to call my long-distance girlfriend. It's quiet and secluded, right on the edge of the school grounds, but next to a residential area, so I never felt afraid. Until that night. Everything started as usual. I was sitting on a swing set near a row of trees at the back of the field, talking to my girlfriend. After a while, I noticed a man in a black hoodie walking toward me from a distance. What made me feel uneasy wasn't just his presence, but the way he moved. He walked incredibly slowly, with his head tilted down, but his eyes seemed locked onto me. I assumed he was some kind of creep or a local troublemaker, so I ended the call and stood up to leave to avoid any problems. As soon as I had walked only a few paces away, the man stepped forward and sat down on the exact same swing I had just left seconds before. I told myself he was probably just an eccentric night walker. I kept heading toward the school exit, but when I was about 20 yards away, I froze. I heard a strange noise behind me, like something heavy being dragged across the ground. Out of curiosity, I turned my head to look back. Under the dim glow of a distant streetlight, I realized there were at least 2 other men standing in the shadows. My curiosity took over. I ran to a large tree at the edge of the lot and hid behind it to watch. They were completely silent. Not a single word was exchanged. One man crouched down close to the ground and then stood up very slowly, while the other stood perfectly still, as if he were standing guard. Between them, something was lying long on the ground, but it was too far away for me to see what it was. Every now and then, they would both go completely motionless for several seconds, creating an eerie, frozen scene. After watching for a bit, the bizarre atmosphere gave me the chills. As I backed away to make a quiet escape, my foot accidentally stepped on a dry branch. The snap echoed loudly through the silence. Immediately, both figures turned their heads at the same time, staring directly at my position. I froze for a second. The man who had been sitting on the swing earlier started walking quickly toward me. I spun around, walked fast, and then broke into a full run toward the school buildings. When I thought I had lost him, I slowed down and tried to catch my breath. But as I approached the exit near the school grounds, I froze again. Another man was looming in the shadows, blocking the only way out, right in front of me. I tried to stop my shaking and acted natural, like a casual walker just passing through. But the man had no intention of moving. His cold gaze felt like it was cutting right through me. I immediately changed direction toward a side path on the left. Just seconds later, I heard footsteps behind me. He was following me. I pulled out my phone and pretended to be on a call, talking very loudly about school security and cameras. I hoped it would make him back off, but it didn't work. The footsteps behind me didn't stop. In fact, they got faster. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would explode. It was pitch black, and there wasn't a soul around to help. The man behind me was large, and he was closing the gap. Suddenly, I remembered that the library near the dorms had just installed a new motion sensor lighting system. I ran as fast as I could toward it. As soon as I hit the sensor zone, I ran while waving my arms high in the air. Instantly, a whole row of floodlights snapped on at once, lighting up the entire area. I stopped and whipped around. In the bright light, I caught a glimpse of a face, mostly hidden by a hood. The man stood still for a few seconds, then turned around and walked away quickly into the dark. I didn't stay there for another second. I ran all the way home and double-locked every door. I couldn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I wrote everything down and went to the police. However, after checking the area, they said they found nothing suspicious and there were no recent missing persons reports. They suggested I was just being overly sensitive, but I know what I saw. My gut feeling tells me that some horrible secret was being buried out there that night. Since then, I've never set foot in that field after dark again.
My name is Liam, and Ryan was my best friend growing up in Colorado. We were inseparable, but our lives followed very different tracks. Ryan was the disciplined one. He got straight A's and worked harder than anyone I knew. Yet life always seemed like an uphill battle for him. I wasn't a total slacker, but I lived on a whim and followed my gut. Somehow, I always ended up with a streak of unexplainable good luck. Last winter, Ryan invited me to go hiking in the Rockies to celebrate the near completion of a major career project. I was stoked for him, and we headed out immediately. The weather was fine when we started. The air was crisp and the sky was clear. But by mid-afternoon, everything changed. The wind picked up first, and then the snow began to dump down hard. Within an hour, our visibility was completely gone. Ryan stayed calm, constantly checking his maps and trying to find our bearings. But we only seemed to drift deeper into the wilderness. As night fell, we stopped looking for the trail and focused on finding shelter. My luck kicked in again when I spotted a cabin within 20 minutes. I thought it would be abandoned, but there were already 3 men inside. The first was Mark, who looked gaunt and exhausted. The second was Daniel, a younger guy with a tired, expressionless face. The last was Henry, a small Asian man. We exchanged some polite greetings. I noticed right away that none of them had actual hiking gear. No one asked about the weather or the way out. They didn't act like hikers caught in a surprise storm. Being the talkative one, I started chatting to break the heavy silence. Slowly, they began to open up. Mark explained that his business had just collapsed after years of struggle. He had lost all his money and then his family. Daniel was reeling from a different kind of shock. His longtime girlfriend was about to marry his best friend, the ultimate betrayal. Henry spoke about being a victim of severe bullying for years because of his appearance. After talking to them, the common thread became clear. They hadn't come to the cabin to escape the storm. They had come to the mountains to end their lives. I've always been an optimist, and I couldn't just watch them give up. I stayed awake all night, using every argument and every story of my own good luck to encourage them. I told them there was still so much to live for. Ryan sat right beside me. He chimed in with a few words of agreement here and there, but mostly he just watched in silence. Before we went to sleep, I exchanged phone numbers with the 3 men. They seemed to have had a breakthrough, thanking me for giving them a reason to keep going. I finally drifted off, feeling a deep sense of relief. When I woke up, it was almost noon, and the 3 men were gone. Ryan suggested we head toward the summit to find them. He was worried that once they got back into their own heads, they might have second thoughts about living. We stepped out of the cabin into the deep snow. Conditions took a turn for the worse almost instantly. The wind was more violent than the day before, whipping snow into my eyes until I could barely see. I tried to stay close to Ryan, but in a matter of minutes, he simply vanished. I was lost in the whiteout. The cold seeped into my bones, and my hands and feet went completely numb. I realized I was going to freeze to death, and no one would ever find me. I collapsed and blacked out. When I opened my eyes again, I was in the back of a search and rescue vehicle. They told me they found me unconscious with severe hypothermia. They had barely reached me in time to save my life. The first thing I did was call Ryan. He picked up and said he had been rescued too. We were being taken home in different directions. Ever since that trip, I felt a strange pull. My mind was constantly stuck on that cabin. An unexplainable force kept urging me to go back to that mountain. My family and friends could tell I wasn't right. They suggested I go to church to pray, or at least find some mental peace.
I was stunned when I walked into the church lobby and saw those same 3 men from the cabin. They walked over to me, beaming with gratitude. They said that night in the cabin had changed everything. All 3 of them had started therapy and were determined to turn their lives around. They thanked me for pulling them back from the edge. Relieved but confused, I asked why they had given me fake phone numbers. All 3 of them looked at me blankly. They insisted they had never given me any numbers at all. Then, when I mentioned Ryan, the atmosphere turned ice cold. All 3 of them swore that it was just the 4 of us in that cabin. There was no one named Ryan. Mark even mentioned how weird it was that I kept turning to the empty space next to me to talk to myself all night. I denied it, of course. I screamed that they were wrong and ran out of the church. I pulled out my phone and called Ryan's parents, only to receive news that felt like a lightning strike. Ryan had died 2 weeks before our trip. His company in New York had pulled the plug on his project at the last second. The shock sent him into a total breakdown. A day later, he went hiking alone and never came back. I went numb. I couldn't wrap my head around any of it. I sat on the curb for a long time, replaying everything. Ryan was the one who always worked harder but caught all the bad breaks. I was the one who glided through life on luck. I realize now that my carefree attitude and my constant stories about my own success must have built up a mountain of resentment in him over the years. Ryan's spirit had led me up that mountain and dragged me into that storm. He hadn't pushed me to find those 3 desperate men to save them. He wanted me to be swallowed up by their darkness. My death would have looked like a perfect accident. I've been living in fear for months now. As I write this, I can perfectly recall Ryan's voice and his eyes from that night. Only now do I realize just how much hatred was hidden behind them.
The call that changed everything and the scary mystery that came after my wife passed away. I'm Dylan, and it felt like my life ended 2 years ago. I used to think about the craziest, darkest stuff, but luckily I didn't go through with it. Maybe God was looking out for me. Back then I was working as an electrician, making pretty good and steady money, but I was busy with work all day long. My wife was a stay-at-home mom, and we had an 18-year-old daughter, Stella, who was studying accounting. I got a call from Stella's school while I was at work.
Hello, Mr. Brown. I'm Stella's advisor.
Yes, hello, ma'am.
I just called Vera a few minutes ago to talk about Stella's grades, sir. But there's one thing I think's more important. I heard some kind of fight or argument while your wife's phone was still on. I heard some yelling and then a voice, saying it was Vera, kept talking to me. But I don't think it was your wife. I called the police. Sorry, I just remembered to call you now.
I had saved my daughter's advisor's number, so I was sure the call wasn't a scam. Feeling anxious and unsure, I immediately called home, but neither my wife nor my daughter picked up, even though the phone was still ringing. I quickly asked the manager if I could leave work early, and then my phone suddenly rang. I was hoping it'd be my wife or daughter calling back to say everything was okay, but it was the police.
Hey, Mr. Brown, we're the local cops, and we're outside your house. We need you to come home right away.
I knew something was up, so I kept praying all the way home. I hoped that when I got home, my wife and daughter would be there to greet me like usual. But that time, it didn't happen. In front of my house, there were 2 police cars and an ambulance with almost a dozen police and medical staff. My daughter Stella was on the ground crying. I ran over to hug my daughter, and Stella cried even harder.
Dad, help Mom. The intruder. There was so much blood on the floor. Please.
Stella couldn't hold it together, and I'd never seen her so scared before. I held her tight while I talked with the police about what was going on. We got a call from your daughter's teacher saying there was a big fight in the family. When we got here, we saw your wife lying on the floor with a lot of blood. As soon as I heard that, I rushed into the house, but the policeman stopped me. Just stay calm. We've given your wife first aid and need to keep the scene clear. I broke down in tears when I found out what was happening. The police kept asking Stella about everything she'd seen.
Someone broke the window. They had a knife and...
Stella couldn't keep going, just sobbing and shaking. I hugged her tight. Seeing that Stella was getting worse, the police quickly took her to the hospital. A few minutes later, they brought my wife out of the house in really bad shape. The stretcher my wife was on was almost totally covered in blood, and she had a bunch of big cuts, especially on her head and face. I just collapsed when I saw that. A few hours ago, my family and I were happily having breakfast together, and now I'm dealing with watching my wife and kids in pain. Mr. Brown, we'll find you another place to stay until the investigation's done. The next 2 days felt like a nightmare for me. My daughter couldn't talk. She just kept crying and was really panicked. My wife was in the ER and ICU, and they weren't letting anyone in. I couldn't remember the last time I ate, but I wasn't even hungry. By the morning of the third day, the police called me to the station to talk about the investigation. Mr. Brown, we're sorry to let you know this. Your wife passed away a few minutes ago. It felt like my heart was being crushed. I had this sharp pain in my chest, and it was super hard to breathe. Second, it looks like your daughter might have killed your wife. I instantly broke down in tears. My life felt like it was falling apart. The police brought out a bunch of evidence from the investigation. First, they talked about the relationship between my wife and daughter. They'd been having a major conflict for the past few months. The day it all went down was when my wife got a call from the school saying Stella had been suspended for almost 2 months because of a bunch of scandals. My wife couldn't handle the phone call and immediately started grilling Stella. Stella, the daughter I always expected and trusted, had been living a wild lifestyle. A bunch of times, my wife would sneak off to the police station to bail Stella out whenever she got into trouble or fights. And it was my daughter who, during all the conflict and drama, grabbed a knife from the kitchen and... Stella, realizing how serious things were, made up a fake scene by smashing the glass door and messing up the living room. I cried and broke down a lot. If I should have paid more attention to my family, maybe this heartbreaking stuff wouldn't have happened. On the day of the trial, I watched my daughter get sentenced and taken away. I can't even put into words how I felt at that moment. She was an adult and had to own up to what she did. For the next year, I looked really skinny. I looked like I was 70, even though I was only 55. Now my life's settled down. I'm back to work, involved in a bunch of volunteer projects, and hanging out with more friends my age. On March 3rd, 2024, around noon, a teacher from the Student Affairs Office at Mount Union University in Ohio called a student's parents to let them know their 19-year-old daughter got suspended because she'd failed a bunch of classes. The teacher then heard a heated argument and a lot of shouting. The call dropped, and after a few callbacks, someone finally picked up and said they were the student's parent. Seeing something weird, the teacher called the police to check things out and a horrifying story that ended tragically for a family came to light.
What happened? Your wife and daughter got into an argument. She's going to jail forever. Wife's dead. I lost two.
The neighbor was always at the window every night, and then I found out the creepy truth. I'm Glenda, 28 years old. I just moved into an apartment after my lease ended at my old place. My apartment's in a mid-range complex with 2 buildings facing each other. I spent a couple weekends cleaning the place and grabbing some stuff. I worked hard to make the place comfier, and I was pretty proud of how it turned out. But I didn't see the nightmare coming my way. I went to open the window for some fresh air on the 7th floor, the top floor, and spotted a dark shadow by the window in the apartment across from mine. I didn't think much of it and just kept looking around my neighborhood, feeling this weird kind of happiness. Later that evening, while I was chilling on the couch watching TV, I glanced over at the window of the apartment across, and that same dark shadow from earlier was still there. I looked a little closer, and it seemed like it was a guy, but I didn't think much of it. It'd be kind of weird to just stare into someone else's window. Pretty quickly, I got my life on track in the new place. I said hi to the neighbors, trying to make some good connections. On the second evening, after getting home from work, the first thing I did was head to the window and throw the curtains open to let some fresh air in. I was kind of shocked to see that black shadow still at the window across the way. The owner of that apartment probably just loved chilling by the window and people watching. That night, I stayed up pretty late dealing with some last-minute work stuff. By the time I wrapped up, it was almost 2 a.m. Even though I was super tired, the second I looked at the window, I was wide awake. The black shadow was still there, hadn't moved at all since 8 hours ago. I started getting a weird feeling, so I closed the curtains and went back to my room. It took me forever to fall asleep. The next morning, I ran into my neighbor as soon as I left the house. She said she'd been living here for almost 10 years, so I asked her about the apartment on the 7th floor in the building across. His name's Charles, around 60 years old. You're better off staying away from that old guy if you don't want any trouble. He's been caught up in a bunch of lawsuits for invading people's privacy. People around here don't want to mess with him because of that. I got chills when I heard my neighbor's story. So Charles has been following me for the last 2 days. My mind was racing as I tried to think back on everything, making sure I hadn't messed up with my behavior or what I was wearing. I felt like a lost soul all day, couldn't focus on anything. I was just stoked to find a new place, but now I had to live in fear and be super careful because of my neighbor's weird and creepy reputation. I've never opened any of the curtains in my apartment, not even for a sec. This went on for 3 days, and I felt super suffocated. I called the building security and told them what was going on, hoping they'd step in and sort it all out. I decided not to show up to avoid making a scene since I had just moved in. About 2 days after I talked to building security, feeling a bit more at ease, I finally opened the curtains again. But surprisingly, the shadow was still there. I quickly called security again, and they said they couldn't get in touch with Mr. Charles.
He might have gone to his son's for a few days. This isn't the first time we couldn't reach him.
Are you guys serious? He's still at the window, staring at my apartment.
We'll check it out and sort this ASAP.
I stopped paying attention to what the security guard was saying. Remembering the binoculars my dad gave me back in high school, I started digging through the unpacked boxes to find them. I yanked the curtains all the way open and threw the window open,
then grabbed the binoculars to check out the apartment across the street. At first, my head was spinning, so I put down the binoculars and started having a hard time breathing. Shakily, I lifted the binoculars to double-check what I saw, and that was the worst decision I ever made. The window of the apartment across the street had a man's body standing there with his head pressed against the glass. His body had patches of skin hanging down, and his eye sockets were dark and deep, with his mouth wide open like he was totally freaking out. I let out a huge scream, and the sound of terror echoed from the top floor, shattering the quiet vibe of the place. I rushed out of the house, banging on all the neighbors' doors, begging them to call the cops ASAP. The body was Mr. Charles, who had died about a week ago from a stroke. He had a pretty bad reputation, according to the neighbor, so nobody really cared that he hadn't showed up in days. Mr. Charles had a son living in the next city, and when he heard about his dad's death, he looked totally shocked and devastated. He played it off by saying they weren't really that close, which is why he hadn't checked in on Mr. Charles for days. I moved out of that apartment right away and crashed at a hotel for a few days before finding a new place. Even now, 8 years after that crazy incident, I still wonder, why was Mr. Charles standing against the window when he died? Did his stroke really hit him out of nowhere? Or was there something else going on? Mommy, can a child live in a trash can? That was an innocent question from my son, but it haunted me ever since I learned the story of a monstrous mother. I am a single mother living with my 5-year-old son in a small neighborhood. Everyone here is very friendly, except for the house right next to mine. I found out that the owner of that house is also a single mother named Hebe, with 5 young children, 4 daughters and a youngest son, who is the same age as my son. She was described by the neighbors as someone with a selfish lifestyle. I met her a few times, but my greetings were ignored and met with a very cold attitude. Several times, loud arguments could be heard coming from Hebe's house at night between her and another man. I guessed that he was the father of one of her 5 children, as they did not resemble each other. One day, I was busy preparing dinner in the kitchen and left my son to play alone in the living room. A moment later, the boy ran over and hugged my leg, saying, "Mommy." I replied to my son while still focusing on cooking, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "Mom, can a child live in a trash can?" My son's innocent question made me laugh. If there are a lot of ugly bacteria, why would you want to live in there? I don't want to, but the boy next door does. Then you should advise your friend not to do that. I brushed off my son's question and quickly finished making dinner. After dinner, I worked while my son watched TV. When I glanced at my son, I was a bit surprised to see him watching images of trash cans. "Honey, what are you watching?" The boy didn't respond. His face was very pensive, and his eyes were fixed on the TV screen. "Are you trying to learn about something? Being inside there must be really cramped. And there are no candles, toys, or even a TV, Mom." My son's voice was very sad. "Who are you talking about?" "It is about the friend from next door." "There's no way that would happen, Mikey. Every baby deserves to be loved." I smiled, knowing my little boy had grown and had the sensitivity of a 5-year-old. I took my son to his room, kissed him goodnight, and then returned to my own room. I didn't go to sleep right away. I finished up some work first. About 10 minutes later, my son cried out loudly in a panic. I didn't have time to react before the boy opened the door, ran to me, and hugged me tightly while crying a lot. "Mom, please save him. He'll be hungry in the trash can." I look at my son in shock. I didn't rush to ask my son questions. Instead, I comforted him first. Once my son calmed down, he recounted everything that had happened. From losing his ball in the neighbor's backyard, he had planned to run in quickly and come back since no one was around. "I picked up a plastic bottle in the yard and threw it in the trash can, just as you told me. I saw him in the trash can." Hearing my son's story left me in shock and made me shudder. I immediately called the police because I was sure my son wasn't lying. From the information I gathered, the police had to visit Hebe's house 3 times before uncovering the horrifying truth. She denied having a son, constantly crying and pretending to be pitiful. In the shed in Hebe's backyard, the police found a trash can containing the body of her youngest son. Hebe took advantage of her sad circumstances to register for government assistance using her son's information. Hebe's children were very unfortunate as they received no care or attention from their own mother. Her youngest son died from a high fever that led to seizures and brain damage. After learning of her son's death, she didn't obtain a death certificate or bury him properly, and she didn't seem to grieve at all. Her selfishness and greed were even more disgusting as Hebe continued to use her son's information to receive monthly benefits. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, but her cold-bloodedness and insensitivity deserved to be locked up forever. It was heartbreaking for the little boy. That innocent soul deserved protection and love instead of being abandoned like that. How could a mother not love her own child? Did she really deserve to be called mom by her 5 children? This story is based on a true event that occurred in Rock Island, Illinois on July 25th, 2023. The police received the tip-off from a neighbor who claimed that the woman next door was hiding the long-dead body of her son in her home. It took a long time for the police to uncover the truth about a selfish, irresponsible mother and her unfortunate little boy. It seems I bought a painting that is haunted. I returned home late at night. My girlfriend was very upset because I didn't give her a heads up. "I'm sorry, Emily. I had something important to do. Look at this," I said excitedly while tearing off the wrapping from the item I had just brought home. "Did you really buy it? The painting you showed me last night, right?" "Yes. Isn't it awesome?" "No, Joseph. It's weird. That's exactly what makes it so special, my love." I happily hung the newly purchased painting above the sofa, right in the center of the living room. My girlfriend didn't seem to care anymore and went into the kitchen. Suddenly, our pet dog barked loudly. "What's going on, buddy?" I said as I petted Max. It looked at the painting on the wall with anger, wariness, and fear, continuously growling as if to warn us. I laughed out loud. "Come on, buddy, it's just a painting." I gave Max a little scratch and then walked over to the dining table that my girlfriend had set. "See? I'm not the only one who finds your painting creepy, right?" "I bought it because the seller said it's a haunted painting. Interesting, right?" My girlfriend changed the subject, and everything went on normally until it was time to go to bed. The loud and frantic barking of Max echoed through the house. I quickly ran to the living room, putting my finger to my lips to signal Max to be quiet since it was nearly midnight. Max kept staring at the painting on the wall with an unprecedented, fierce gaze. "Max, it's just a painting. You'll get used to it soon enough." To be honest, I was also quite startled by the painting at this late hour. Dogs always have a keen sense for human emotions. The gloomy, anguished faces in the painting were highlighted by the image of a boy in panic, running away from those faces. Perhaps those images made Max feel uncomfortable. Despite my reassurances, Max remained wary, not taking his eyes off that painting for even a second. I tugged at Max's collar, intending to take him back to the bedroom, but his determination and his size of over 80 pounds made me feel helpless. I returned to the bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar in case Max changed his mind. I hugged her for comfort, and soon both of us fell into a deep sleep. I wasn't sure how long I had been asleep when I was suddenly awakened by Emily's loud scream. I sprang up like a spring and dashed into the living room, just as my girlfriend was running toward me from the opposite direction. She hugged me tightly and fell to her knees, and I quickly supported her. "There's an intruder. He's in the living room." My girlfriend's voice came out as if she was struggling for air. I immediately turned on all the lights in the house, gripping a pair of scissors tightly in my hand as I went to check around. All the doors in the house were still closed, showing no signs of tampering. The furniture was intact and in its proper place. Especially Max. If there was an intruder, he definitely wouldn't let him go easily. Max was still sitting, intently staring at the painting on the wall. "Joseph, do you feel like there's something strange about that painting?" I looked at Emily in surprise, then turned my gaze back to the painting. The faces of those people were dripping with streams of red tears. I slowly approached with suspicion and fear. Reaching out to touch the painting, the long red streaks were still wet. I brought my hand to my nose and realized it was paint, not blood. My body felt much lighter, and I reassured my girlfriend. She wouldn't accept it and demanded that I get rid of the painting immediately. To keep the peace in the house, I reluctantly agreed. The events that occurred just a few hours after hanging that painting left me feeling bewildered. I picked up the phone to call the person who sold me the painting, even though it was 3 a.m. He refused my request for a refund. "As I said, it's haunted. Now it's yours. If you want to get rid of it, the only way is to sell it to someone else." I ended the conversation feeling helpless. Emily didn't say a word. She rushed over, took down the painting, and slammed it onto the ground, shattering the glass frame. Not stopping there, she tore the painting into many pieces. I couldn't stop her in time and chose to accept it. I gathered everything into a black trash bag and placed it in front of the house for the trash collection service to pick up the next morning. Emily was still upset, so I decided to give her some space to calm down. I went back to sleep at 4 a.m. and woke up at 8 a.m. Not seeing Emily at home, she must have left for work early. When I went to work, the bag containing the painting had indeed been picked up. All day long, I didn't receive any messages from Emily. Returning home in the evening, the house was dark and cold, with no one around. I tried calling Emily but couldn't reach her. Calling some of her friends didn't help either. No one knew where Emily had gone. I called the police, but they wouldn't get involved yet, since the time she had been missing wasn't long enough to classify it as a disappearance. I felt that something was wrong, and Max did too. He was sensitive to every sound. By the end of the next day, the police finally got involved, and that evening I received a call. They reported that they had found Emily, but she was not intact. Emily was crushed in the garbage disposal with no clear cause found. She was left with only a few dismembered, twisted body parts and I felt more pain and despair, regretting that I hadn't listened to her. To overcome this loss and obsession, it's truly difficult for me. It's true that I bought a haunted painting. My twin sister and I have a terrifying secret. I'm Robert, and my twin sister is Laura. Our family of 4 lives in a mobile home. We move every day along the roads through towns, cities, and states. My parents always choose empty lots or wooded areas for the family to spend the night. My sibling and I didn't attend school like other children. Instead, we followed an online program. It may sound deprived and unfortunate, but my family was still very happy for 13 years. One evening, after our parents went to sleep, my sibling and I snuck into the forest to play. Because we spent 90% of our time in the van, we were very curious about everything around us. Laura clutched the hem of her shirt tightly, following closely behind as I held the flashlight to light our way. The sudden rustling sounds of leaves being disturbed startled us. We stood frozen for a moment until a growling sound signaled the approach of a large and terrifying creature. I grabbed Laura's hand tightly and ran with all my strength without looking back. Miraculously, my sister and I made it back into the house safely without our parents noticing. We absolutely kept that secret from our parents. The mobile life of the family continued as usual. One day, I told my parents during dinner that I wanted to settle down somewhere. I want to go to school, have more friends, and sleep on a big bed in my own room. My parents looked at me silent for a long time. Do you still remember what happened when the two of you were just 4 years old? Mom asked gently. We don't want that to happen again. We won't be able to live if we lose you two. When my twin sister and I were 4 years old, while the family stopped to play at a park, we almost got kidnapped by a man. Since that incident, our parents have been more vigilant about us, and rules were established for us. Laura didn't say anything, although I knew she also shared the same desire as I did. I remained silent, although I was not satisfied or comfortable. Several months passed with our mobile life until my sibling and I were about to celebrate our 15th birthday. That day, my parents parked the car in an empty lot and instructed my sibling and me to stay put in the car until they returned. Laura tidied up the car to decorate for the birthday, while I lounged on the bed with my gaming console. A moment later, Laura called me urgently. Robert, come here quickly. Laura was sitting next to an old box with some papers in her hands. The box was something my dad used to prop up the driver's seat every day, and I thought the papers were just some kind of advertisements. But Laura handed them to me with a very serious expression. That was our birth certificate, but our parents' names were Owen Taylor and Anna Taylor, while our current parents are Maria and Louis. There were also a few old newspapers. June 13, 2000. A case of 2 missing twin children under 6 months old received significant attention. November 20th, 2000. The mother of the 2 children, after months of desperately searching for her kids, went insane. The father did not give up. He was willing to pay any price and do whatever it took to find his children. April 4th, 2004. The father, after many years of searching, accidentally encountered the 2 children in a park. With the identifying features, he was certain they were his 2 children. However, the kidnappers attacked him and took them away. Once again, the man fell into despair as he lost his children for the second time. There is a hand-drawn sketch of the 2 kidnappers in the article, and it's shocking how much it resembles our current parents by about 70%. An article also included a letter that the father wrote to his 2 children. Dear Robert and Laura, my beloved children, I don't know where you are right now, but remember that your parents always love you. I will try to find you and bring you back, so please stay healthy. I looked at Laura. Her eyes were red and her body trembled from shock. I didn't think much, grabbing Laura's hand, and ran out of the car, running fast and far to a police station to ask for help. We were kept at the police station for our safety. Laura couldn't stop crying. I knew she was very scared. That very night, a man came to the police station. He looked at us for a long time before kneeling down and bursting into tears. He was our biological father. Our adoptive parents were wanted and captured 2 days later after going into hiding. It was difficult, with feelings of guilt and regret, as we had reported the people who had taken care of us for 15 years. But according to the police, we would soon have been sold by that couple as valuable goods. My brother and I were taken back to our hometown in Ohio, living in the spacious house we had long dreamed of. Although there are still distances and unfamiliarity, we will gradually adjust because we know that this place truly has the love of family. My boyfriend won't let me eat anything except what he makes. Me and Louis and his clothes were all stained with this dark red stuff that I was pretty sure was blood. Louis said he couldn't trust the meat guy, so he went to the farm and asked the owner to butcher the animals right in front of him. "You're crazy, Louis," I shouted at my boyfriend. He didn't say anything, just finished up the meat and stashed it in the freezer. That night, the sight of Louis's bloody clothes and his blank face had me thinking a lot. Looking at my boyfriend next to me, I was like, did he just hit up the meat farm? But then I decided to just ignore where Louis's meat was coming from. Right before Christmas, Louis said his parents wanted us over for dinner, but he didn't want to go. But I really wanted to go. I'd never met his parents, and I wanted to ask them about Louis's weird eating habits. After a whole day of bugging him, Louis finally said yes. On Christmas Day, we were all set to roll out. I got all dressed up and put together a nice gift basket while Louis was still in the kitchen whipping up dessert. As we pulled up in front of his house, Louis kept telling me to only eat the stuff he made. I agreed to make it quick, and we both went into the house to a warm welcome from his parents. They were super classy, friendly, and loaded. During the meal, his parents and I were happily chatting while Louis was quiet. I felt really rude for constantly turning down the food from his parents. When he stepped out to take a call, I had a little booze in me and totally forgot all about Louis's rules. I tried the veggie salad while his parents were all happy and excited about it. It was awesome. I totally got where my boyfriend's cooking skills came from. When I asked why he had those weird eating habits, his mom just sighed. We used to have a maid, but she just vanished. That same day, we found out the food she made was poisonous. I guess that's why she took off. Ever since then, Louis has been kind of freaked out. He learned to cook and makes all his own food now. I saw how helpless his parents were and just ended up understanding and loving my boyfriend even more. The problem was the booze was getting to me, so I secretly snuck some food from Louis's parents' place, and I definitely couldn't let him find out. The next day, when Louis went to work, I couldn't wait anymore. I grabbed the food his parents gave me last night, heated it up, and dug in. Just as I was almost done eating, I saw something in the food that made me choke. It was a human finger, like the pinky finger to be exact. I screamed and tossed the plate of food right on the ground. I crawled into the bathroom and kept throwing up for an hour until all that was coming up was just this bitter yellow stuff from my stomach. When Louis got back, he rushed over, looking surprised, mad, and helpless. I asked to be taken to the hospital to get all that food out of my system, and Louis jumped right on it. As soon as I got out of the hospital, I asked Louis to take me to the farm where he got the meat, and he totally went along with it, no questions asked. After seeing the whole slaughtering process, I trusted my boyfriend. But after that Christmas, I just couldn't eat meat anymore. Louis looked at me all helpless and said, "Maybe my parents' meat grinder is messed up again." The dark world in my cupboard for 6 years. I was always locked in the kitchen cupboard by my parents. The first time was when I was 6 years old. I was terrified, panicking, screaming, and resisting. I'm not sure what I did wrong at that time, but I kept crying and apologizing. "I'm sorry. I ate a cookie. I'm sorry, Dad, Mom." My parents' face showed no emotion. I innocently asked them, "Why are you putting me in here?" "Well, why not?" That's a phrase that haunts me to my very core. I looked through the keyhole to catch a glimpse of the outside world. I can't remember how long I had been inside, but just as I was about to faint from exhaustion, the sound of the cupboard lock being opened echoed. My mother picked me up and placed me at the dining table. Although all I wanted at that moment was to use the restroom, I didn't dare to ask. The subsequent times I was locked in the kitchen cabinet occurred more frequently and lasted longer. I still resisted, still begged, and was filled with fear. After being released, everything went back to normal, except for being locked up. I was doing well. I was growing strong and plump, but it was only physically. A part of my soul had been worn away through those times of being locked up. The longest was 3 days when I was 7 years old. My parents locked the cupboard and went to town. By the time they returned, I felt like I was at the end of my life. Darkness, cramped space, and the smell of dampness, all of it had become incredibly familiar to me. I no longer screamed, resisted, or begged. Instead, I embraced it. I savored my own space, glancing through the keyhole to see my parents passing by occasionally. It seemed that their confinement was an attempt to make me disappear, but it only strengthened my existence even more. As my body grew, I found more comfortable positions to lie in and learned to adapt. And I realized that I enjoyed being confined. I liked the feeling of being cramped and suffocated. Once I witnessed a tense argument between my parents. They mentioned me in that argument. Mom said that because of me, she had lost many opportunities. At that time, I was already 10 years old, but I couldn't fully understand everything that was happening in that argument. But I understood that my parents didn't love me. I withdrew into myself, seeking joy in a world that was just mine. When I turned 12, my parents stopped locking me in the cupboard. I wondered, why don't you let me in there anymore, Mom? Why not? Mom said with a gentle smile as she looked at me. I guessed it was probably because my body had grown too big for that cupboard. So I chose to lock myself in the wardrobe, under the study table, under the bed. I would crawl into all the dark, confined spaces whenever I had nothing else to do. And then I found the perfect spot, a small cupboard in my parents' room. It was half the size of a refrigerator, with a door that opened outward, located above the wardrobe. I only dared to go in there when my parents were out, timing my escape to ensure I'd be gone before they returned. One time, I fell asleep, perhaps because that secret place was just too comfortable. When I heard the sound of something breaking, I jolted awake. Peering through the crack of the door, I felt a surge of anxiety as I realized my parents had returned, but something felt off. They stood looking at each other with angry eyes. The furniture shattered on the floor, and then Dad pulled out the gun. And in a brief moment, it rendered Mom motionless on the crimson floor. Mom was staring directly at me, her eyes filled with immense pain and despair, as if she were blaming me. I wasn't sure if I could even breathe at that moment. Staying in the cupboard with my body stiff, I looked at my mother for a long time, and my father did the same, until another loud gunshot rang out, tearing through my eardrums. Dad fell down, right next to Mom. I was determined not to go outside, sitting in my own world while observing my parents' world. Until the police arrived, they found me and took me to the hospital. I remember at that time I was suffering from severe mental illness. I had completely lost all emotions towards everything around me. After 6 months in the hospital, I was taken to a children's welfare center. My life from here stepped into a new world, one filled with more emotions. I spent many years afterwards trying to escape the dark and cramped places. I even got a new name, leaving all the pain of the past behind. I always remember my parents. The last image of them is something I can never forget. That will be a memory, a sad memory, rather than an obsession within me. I can't understand why my parents treated me that way. I hope no child will ever be as unfortunate as I was back then. I've got a dream marriage, but a total nightmare for a wife who's supposed to be perfect. Joey, do you think I've put on weight again? Nah, babe, you always look amazing. I usually get asked about my wife's looks at least 10 times. She's super picky about taking care of her body. Back in high school, my wife asked her dad if she could put her graduation pic up in the living room. That pimpled up skin is gonna freak out everyone who comes to our place, honey. I get why she's so hung up on her looks. My wife doesn't work. Her job is picking out a good spa, booking skincare appointments, and figuring out what foods are good for her figure. I'm cool with that. I've got her back, and my money covers everything she needs. But there's one thing that's always bugged me, and I still haven't figured it out. My wife isn't planning on having kids, even though we've been married for almost 6 years. I've tried to convince her a bunch of times, even promised to cover the latest treatments to help her get back in shape. One time I brought her to a company party with me. Hearing my coworkers say I've got a wife who looks like a Disney princess made me feel pretty proud. I could tell how happy and proud my wife was, too. "You're so lucky, Joey. I'm seriously jealous." That coworker's joke kind of turned into a death sentence for my marriage. Since then, whether it's a big party or just meeting clients, my wife insisted on tagging along. She bought a ton of dresses and makeup to get ready for those occasions. "You should totally feel lucky to be married to me, Joey." My wife was fixing her dress while saying that line I know by heart, like word for word and everything. At another company party, my wife was just laughing away at all the compliments. "Joey, what do you think when she said I look like Princess Fiona and you're like Shrek?" My wife turned to ask in this kind of condescending tone after chatting with my coworker. "We're equals, remember that?" I was super annoyed because I always felt put down, so I snapped back. After that party, my wife didn't talk to me for a few days. To chill things out at home, I stepped up to make peace. There's nothing to brag about when you're competing with your own wife. Luxury bags, roses, cakes, and nice bottles of wine. There was a simple spread in quantity, but definitely not in quality. We clinked our glasses, and then I don't remember a thing after that. When I woke up, I found my arms and legs all tied up, and my body stuck to the bed with a ton of tape. "Pamela, what does this mean?" My wife was lying next to me, whispering in my ear. "Babe, I'm sorry for saying those mean things. I'll make it up to you." She held up a glass bottle with clear liquid at my eye level, and the label had a picture of a corroded hand on it. "No, Pamela, please," I yelled when I saw my wife slowly tipping the bottle of that crazy liquid. "Just a little, don't freak out." Her creepy laugh filled the air as she dumped the liquid right in my face. I screamed, feeling like a million ants were all stinging me at once. I felt my lips bubbling, my eye goo oozing out, and my skin melting like melted cheese. My wife's creepy laugh was still ringing in my ears. Later, I saw the photos she posted on social media, and my friends were all laughing because they thought I was wearing a mask. I have no idea how I got away, or if my wife even untied me. I was feeling around on the floor, with most of my vision gone. I quickly found the bathroom after I figured out the layout of the room. The cold water came pouring in, and it helped ease my pain a bit. But then someone snatched the shower head right out of my hand. That same crazy, twisted laugh and the non-stop clicking of the camera drove me absolutely nuts. I just rushed over, grabbed the phone, and smacked Pamela's chest. I bolted out of the bedroom, trying to dial 911 while my eyes were about to pop out and my lips were still bubbling and sizzling. I got hit in the back by something hard, so I turned around to fight back after I shoved my wife away. A few seconds later, I heard her scream, "My skin! My face! Help!" The police showed up, and I slowly started to fade out. I woke up in the hospital with my face all bandaged up, and it took almost a month before I could see a little light. After a long time of serious treatment, I finally got to see my face again, and one eye was messed up with rough skin. After almost 30 surgeries, I was doing better, accepting that I'd have to live with one good eye and the other one being damaged. I saw a pic of my ex-wife with a long, crooked nose, and I found out her fellow inmates called her the long-nosed witch.